listen to this forum. I'm sure you'll all come away much more informed. So how it's going to proceed is that first we're going to hear from the CEO of the Malaysian Institute for Debate and Public Speaking. And we'll move on to the exhibition debate, and then the forum, and lastly the Q&A session. So if you have questions and it's all percolating in your head right now, you can pick it up and then you can ask those questions. We'll pass around mic, or you can come down to the front and ask those questions later on as well. So without further ado, I call on the CEO of the Malaysian Institute for Debate and Public Speaking.
Test. When the Malaysian Institute for Debate and Public Speaking, MIDP, was founded in 2010, the people behind the organization had one simple goal, that is to promote and facilitate debate and public speaking to become the main tool of human capital development. The founders had and used 4 key activities, which were training, events, consultancy, and resources. But the problem with that combination is that even through MIDP, debaters are not able to fulfill their duties, that is to advocate. Why do debaters have that duty to advocate? Because debaters are competitive in nature. So when they enter a debate tournament, when they win one, they will boast about it. When they will lose, they will complain and moan about it, but they will go back home and read more, and eventually become more aware of the issues surrounding them, but eventually win that debate and they will boast about it as well. The good thing about that is that the moment they become more aware, they also start to empathize and eventually understand the real situation. And on top of that, why debating is good, why debaters should advocate, is that without debaters talking about it, or without people sharing their perspectives, discourse cannot truly happen. A discourse that takes into consideration of different perspectives, a discourse that finally comes with the clincher and eventually makes or solves the problem. Throughout the year, MIDP were invited to perform debate showcases. We had a few that truly mattered, we had a few that didn't matter so much just for show, but we did it anyway in order for us to raise funds to send our team to the national debating to send the national debating team to attend the World Schools Debating Championship. I wasn't happy about it. It was, for show, it was a performance, but we did it anyway. And precisely why I decided that we integrate the 4th pillar of MIDP, that is resources, and integrate it in the first 3 pillars, and introduce the 4th pillar of MIDP, that is advocacy. On top of that, that is why we are gathered here today, and we decided to host WORK, or Weekend of Knowledge Revolution, and to bring in the key leaders, the industry leaders, NGOs, CSOs, and GLCs in government to work together with us. Because ultimately, this is where we can make changes happen. This is a turning point, ladies and gentlemen. This is a milestone. Everyone, welcome to Weekend of Knowledge Revolution. Welcome to WORK. I hope you'll enjoy the show. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll also be hosting the debate. And I'll do it from here. Ladies and gentlemen, can we invite the debaters up on stage? In the government bench, the Prime Minister Kwang Ek, Team Malaysia to the World Schools Debating Championship, will be speaking for Team Malaysia in the upcoming World Schools Debating Championship. He is currently approaching the end of high school and is looking forward to university debating. Deputy Prime Minister Hassan Taha, formerly of the International Islamic University in Malaysia, an Egyptian and Canadian, who is now married to a Malaysian. Hassan Taha is an economics graduate of IIUM, who reached the semi-finals of the Asian Championships and was part of the team ranked 26 out of 400 teams at the World University Debating Championship. He is currently a business strategist for Astro's children's content, though he has no children of his own, and describes his nephews as enough. Katrina Adrian from Taylor's University Lakeside campus, a native Iban born in the small city of Miri, Sarawak. Katrina Empiang Adrian is 2018's Australasians Open finalist and semi-finalist at the Asian Championships. She is currently finishing her second year at Taylor's Lakeside as an economics major and is the president of the Taylor's University Debating Society. I'm so sorry, that is Katrina is part of the opposition. The last speaker of the government is Sharon Jessie, formerly of BC Malaya, currently a first-year associate at Sharon Delamore and Partners. Sharon has debating experience to spare. She was English as a second language champion of the Australasian Debating Championships. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the government team. In the opposition is Katrina, and then we have Har Navinjit Singh, formerly of Sunway University. Navin was a representative of the Malaysian World Schools team in 2017. He is national quarter-finalist and has made multiple appearances in the elimination rounds of national tournaments. And the last speaker from the opposition whip, is Razak Fazal from London School of Economics. Hoping to be a corporate sellout with a heart of gold, Razak is a bank Negara, a scholar at LSE. Razak was once part of the first Malaysian team to make it to the elimination rounds of the World Schools Debating Championship. And in 2017, representing LSE, he was the grand finalist of the World Universities Peace Invitational Debate. The debate will be, each speaker to begin 5 minutes. No replies. On the motion, this House supports the implementation of a universal basic income. Let's invite the Prime Minister to start this debate.
Testing. Single mothers, the homeless poor, and also workers who have been displaced by occupation. The list of people who have been wronged by the inefficiency of current welfare systems goes on. The point I'm trying to make is that it is rather atrocious that we tie the poor to rigid criteria in order for them to be eligible for welfare benefits when they're already festering in so much suffering. We say we need a rehaul for a system that is much more accountable and is much more far-reaching and universal in nature. Universal basic income is that system. So basically, I'm going to explain firstly what is UBI and why is it that the principle behind UBI is one that is just inherently better. So firstly, what is UBI or universal basic income? UBI is a basic income provided to every single citizen within a particular state. That means that regardless of their wealth status, regardless of their financial circumstances, or even their job statuses, every single individual within that state will receive that regular sum of money from the state. So we have a rather complex mechanism coming from the side of government. So in terms of provision, we'll provide these forms of aid and these kinds of money in a fixed sum to every single individual within a particular state. This means that you don't have to apply for these kind of things. Every single individual will get these forms of income. We want to start from a base income. That means that with this base income, eventually when there's inflation or other kinds of financial situations, we can gradually increase that sum in order to accommodate much more individuals. We will fund this UBI program through maybe taxing the uber rich through capital gains taxes, or also reduce the dependency on current welfare programs, for example, BRIN or social security
programs that oftentimes take up a lot of the pools of money, or divert these forms of money and then we'll put them into our current UBI. So in the US currently, we have 75 means-tested welfare programs, which leads to massive leakages within the public administration system and also within the welfare system. Our model is likely to be much more cheaper and much more accountable. Precisely because you don't have to appeal or you don't have to interview applicants, our centralized model and our centralized program is one that reduces the bureaucracy, like bureaucratic budget and all these kinds of other kinds of problems. So the argument coming from my speech is on the right for citizens to live a decent life. Single mothers in Wangsa Maju, for example, are starving themselves because the meager income that they have barely paid the electricity bills. In the circumstances and in context of such deficiencies, UBI is far much more superior than current welfare systems because it gives them a fixed income and gives them at least a life of less agony and torment. So when you don't have enough income to supplement your current life, at least the basic income that the state provides to you can be used to put your children within schools, can be used to do the extremely bare minimum things that you need as a human being in order to continue to survive. But because this is a system that is universal and indiscriminate in nature, where there's just no criteria and standards which poor have to adhere to, it means that we get greater outreach in this side of the house because every single individual in that state, regardless of whether or not they were wrong by automation or whether they were wrong by economic recession, every single individual in that state will receive that one basic income and that fixed sum of money, which allows them to at least live a decent life as a human being within a state. Here's why current welfare systems are terrible. Not only you have to be under a specific income or under the poverty line in order to be eligible to healthcare or housing benefits. You also, for example, this oftentimes leads to disincentives to work because it actually is a form of welfare trap that traps the very poor in perpetual states of poverty. When you tell these individuals that, hey, you need to be under this specific income in order for you to receive these massive benefits from the state, this actually disincentivizes these kinds of individuals from maybe pursuing jobs or maybe even working harder because these are individuals that just want to have a better life, getting much more welfare from the state. So when you also have no time to go for skills training because you have to work so hard in order for you to supplement the meager income that you have, this means that you oftentimes do not actually get to improve your skills as a laborer within an industry that is already so challenging. For the very poor and for the invisible, very proud to propose.
We thank the Prime Minister for starting this debate. To start the debate on behalf of the opposition, we'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition.
Yes. Okay. I'm sure we're all very excited to be gathered here early in the morning to talk about economics. But the second thing that I think is missing from the side of government is an assumption. The problem with the universal basic income is that it's universal. It is not targeted and it doesn't target the specific structures that cause poverty. Throwing money at a problem isn't the best solution. It makes for good photo ops, but it ends there. Coming from the side of opposition, what's our stance going to be in this debate? We think the first thing that must be cleared up, and in order to have a good debate, is that this debate has to operate where both of us assume the best. So you cannot assume that all welfare systems are going to be really bad while also trying to defend the best of the universal basic income. That's not very fair, right? But the second thing, even then, I'm going to be charitable. I'll prove why even the worst of the welfare system is better than the universal basic income. The second thing that I'm going to tell you is that we support targeted forms of welfare for specific groups of people. So if you're under a certain type of income line, we would give you that money. The second thing that we would do is that we would increase all forms of government efforts. So in terms of setting standards and in terms of setting specific bylines that potentially prevent some people from getting access, we are more than happy to remove that and to study it and to at least ensure that more people do it. But this first thing that I will have to respond to is the argumentation that the current welfare system just isn't great. This is non-contentious. Obviously, each system has problems, but I think you have to weigh this issue out on a comparative. The comparative here is that there has to be some level of distinction and who we prioritize in terms of giving aid. It's not very contentious when we say that the government has finite resources. We can only give money to so many people. If we have to make a choice, prioritizing the extreme poor and having that line of distinction is better, because compared to that one person in Wangsa Maju, they have it somewhat better. Their ability to get out of that situation is significantly more compared to someone under the extreme poverty line. So if we have to pick and choose, we have to prioritize those that need help the most. So what am I going to tell you about this? So what am I going to tell you? Firstly, let's just add some context to this debate, right? So the speaker before me gave this example of, the United States example. So I don't feel very American. This place doesn't seem very American. So I think where it's more realistic is that this debate happens in a context where governments are specifically looking to cut back on reforms, or they're looking to cut back on benefits. We see this being signaled with the Mahathir government, where he signifies that at some point in the future, Malaysia may have to scale back on pensions, or at some point in the future, we may have to reduce the amount of RIM offerings that we give to people. What does this signify? I think this signifies that to some extent, we have to pick and choose where we give our money and where we concentrate this money. What is the implication of this? The implication is that specific amounts of people who could potentially be reliant on the system for the universal basic income could potentially be further hurt in a world where the government chooses to change their policy. The problem with the universal basic income compared to a standardized, lowerized income is that the universal basic income tends to accommodate for other needs. So that 500 ringgit you get is significantly more or more easier for you to rely on because it doesn't have those same conditions. Or is it 5 minutes? Sorry. Okay, never mind. I'll just wrap up very quickly, right? The second principle that we have is that you shouldn't receive benefits or aid if you don't necessarily need it, right? So comparatively to a lot of people, I'm sure I'd be really happy if I an extra 500 ringgit entered my account today, right? But I don't need it. Compared to another person, that person should be prioritized by the state, not everyone else in that area. The last thing that I'll then say, yeah, I know I'm over time, but I'll end it here, right? The last thing that I'll then say is that the problem with the universal basic income is that it ignores the structural issues. Oh, it's 4 minutes, I'm under time. Great, so we can listen to me speaking for a bit longer, right? The problem then with the universal basic income is that more often than not, the people who need it the most, or the people who are poor for structural reasons, are ignored. These structural reasons are instances potentially like racism. Maybe it's sexism in the workplace. But the problem is that governments oftentimes look for quick solutions for complex issues. So given that they are giving you money, the next assertion by a state is that we have helped you. We have given you a certain portion of your income. Maybe the structural issues are of your own doing. Maybe you're too sensitive. This sort of narrative is easier to justify in a world where you assert that everyone else is on a better level or on an equal playing field as a result of money. Why is this better or worse compared to welfare? Because the word welfare in of itself implies that there is a problem, that you have to have a certain amount of aid in order to become better. So comparatively, the universal basic income sounds like a great idea, but that's the extent it goes to. It's an idea that lacks practicality. Thank you.
Just to be clear, you can POI. I said otherwise, I apologize. We thank the leader of opposition. Let's invite the second speaker of the government, the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Sorry, just set a timer. Testing.
So there's three things I want to talk about in my speech. The first is we're going to get to the heart of the matter that the first speaker brought up from the side opposition, which is it's just a bad idea to not target specific people with specific needs, with specific amounts or forms of welfare. That'll be the first thing. The second thing I'm going to talk to you about is what this would actually do, given in a Malaysian context, for example, right? For the people who do need it most, even though it is universal. And lastly, why we have a need for it to be universal, and these are all interlinked, obviously, because of automation and the coming of the machines, and the fact that in anywhere from 20 to 100 years from now, a lot of the jobs that currently exist and that help support low-income earners or middle-skilled workers just won't exist anymore. And we're going to have to find a solution because current solutions that we have, the safety net that exists, doesn't catch all of them and cannot be expected to do so. So let's talk about targeting, right? First, speaker said that targeting is like not targeting is a bad idea because he doesn't need the extra 500 ringgit. Well, that's good for you, but that actually solves the problem that you mentioned towards the end of your speech. The problem of racism, of sexism, of unpaid labor, where women who are single mothers or even married, but they work at home and they're not paid for that labor. All of that goes unaccounted for in the current economy that we have now. And by having it universal and giving it to everyone, we sort of leap over these problems and are able to directly give money to people who would otherwise face those barriers and recompense them for it. That's one. The other issue is that even with targeting that we have now, and one of the targetings that the speaker from opposition mentioned is targeting based on, you have to make below a certain amount, below the poverty line, for example, to qualify for BRIM or to qualify for welfare. The problem with that is it traps people in the poverty trap. So what that means is if I have to make below a certain amount in order to qualify, I'm not incentivized to make beyond that amount because then I'm going to lose the funding for my shelter, for my health care, or what have you. So that traps people in that system that doesn't give them any motivation to escape it. And if you're just beyond the poverty line, I mean, I'm sure Zamir can tell you more about this. The poverty line is actually hotly debated in Malaysia and in many countries around the world. Where should the poverty line be? If you're making 800 ringgit a month, are you at the poverty line if you're single? If you have 2 children? What if you're making 1,000? Is that enough? If you're living in KL? And so oftentimes countries underreport or set the poverty line below what it should actually be in order to be able to report, oh, poverty in Malaysia has gone down by X percentage, we're doing fine, right? And so that's something that you run into when you have it targeted based on those criteria. Let's talk about what this would look like in Malaysia. And there have actually been, not right now, there have actually been countries that have had forms of universal basic income that have been pretty successful. For example, in a basic income trial that was in Namibia from 2007 to 2012, parents, because of that trial, could now afford school fees, could now afford uniforms for their kids, and could now encourage attendance for their children to actually attend school. Again, Zamir can tell you more about this from Malaysia on that. One of the problems that parents face, especially in rural areas, is that they choose not to send their kids to school, and their kids don't go regularly because they have to work at home. They have to take care of a loved one. They have to work and earn money in order to be able to help provide for the family. At the point when you have regular, consistent payments, for example, that are able to help that family, the incentive structure completely changes. Now parents say, oh, it's not useless for you to attend school now because you actually might have a future and I'll be still taken care of by this. Now they're encouraging their kids to go to school and they can afford to do well in school and study after school instead of being forced to work, for example. We think those things are massively important. Sorry, I didn't get to you respond afterwards. The last thing we're going to tell you is that the coming of automation means it's very critical that we find a solution. The Khazanah Research Institute actually estimates that anywhere from 11% to 54% of current jobs that exist right now in Malaysia will be displaced or significantly changed in the coming years. So this is anywhere, they estimate from 20 years to 50 years and beyond. The point is, it's coming and it will eventually happen. The type of jobs we're talking about are general clerks, machine and plant operators, cashiers, and administration workers. When those jobs are no longer available for large segments of the population who no longer have any regular income for them to be able to go and upskill and retrain and learn to function in a very dynamic and fast-moving economy, those people get left out. So BRIM right now covers, maybe a smaller percentage of Malaysia's population. But as that population that needs to be covered by a safety net expands, BRIM and the Felder and the safety net that we have now cannot hope to compete, cannot hope to catch up with the needs that exist in society. We're going to be moving away from long-term employment to a lot of contract and independent workers who don't have that sort of security. In the interest of letting people work in the job that they want and things that they're useful at, and having them have the ability to upskill and retrain and do things that actually make them genuinely happy instead of working just to survive, please support universal basic income.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that speech. Let's invite Deputy Leader of Opposition.
The purpose in opposition side is not to say people who are poor, people who can't afford to go to school, should not get money. Obviously they should. And obviously we'll give them money should they need to fulfill their basic requirements to live and live in dignity. But we're telling you, however, if you're swimming in cash, live off gold, and eat avocado toasts every day, you shouldn't be able to earn an extra £500 or ringgit for free, because that's just not right. And on our side, that's what our policy has been about. So that's why now we're talking about targeted workers for people who can afford to get, who can't afford to get a daily income. But for most people, for some people, these individuals don't deserve to get them. What I'm going to talk to you about revolves around two things. I'm first going to tell you why an effective targeted system can exist, and why those problems they outlined to you were at best, well, just mechanistic problems that can be solved. But secondly, let's talk about living standards. And does universal basic income actually change the way in which you live and improve your living standards overall? Because there's a case to say that it actually doesn't, which we'll explain later on. But before that, a few responses, which centers around two things. What about robots? Because the grandiose claim in opposition side is that at one point, every single job will be taken by robots, and hence we need this universal basic income. Sure, at one point. At one point, maybe a lot more people will be living off unemployment benefits because there just literally isn't a job for you to work that can make you earn enough to go to live this decent standard of living. But at that point, then it's fine. And I think it's not wrong to say that unemployment benefits will cover a larger range of individuals whose jobs have been displaced as a result of automation. But before that, at the point at which we live right now, like there really is no point to give free money to individuals who are still working, earning a lot of money, and really don't need the extra amount. So, like, unless they can frame it in the context in the present, they're not arguing for universal basic income. They're still arguing for unemployment benefits, just for a large range of people before they lose their jobs, which does not make sense. But at a different point in time, I think economically, what this affects, however, is the inability for people to desire high productivity jobs. So, like, there's an argument to be made that individuals might settle for low productivity jobs because of the cushion that they have. Now, the difference in our system is, and I think you need to understand welfare payments, is that you don't lose everything immediately after you get a job. It is a threshold and it's progressive. That means if you earn above a specific amount, what you lose is a percentage of that specific amount. The same way that tax systems aren't as punishing as you have described, it depends on how much you've earned beyond a certain threshold. So if we can implement that like rather seamlessly in taxation, I don't see why this cannot be a perfect targeted welfare system that we can achieve the same way it's already implemented in different cases around the world. Now,
yeah, sure. So current welfare systems, for example, barely are able to meet the survival needs of the numbers of people who are currently on welfare. It's stretched to its limit right now, especially given the budget, $1 trillion of debt that Malaysia has right now. How do you propose accommodating masses more of people in the future? Even though like this will be phased in, obviously won't be implemented immediately right now, but it needs to in some way come in to prepare for the future.
Yeah, but that problem is far worse in your world because you have to accommodate with that 1 trillion debt supposedly with a lot more people at this point in time as opposed to in the future. So really, this is non-contentious. But what is, however, important to note in this speech is that at 2 points when you compare those individuals, you have to understand that it's disingenuous to argue that this benefit system doesn't work. Like there are many reasons why it's not the case. Not just because the system is ineffective. It's because people don't know. Like a recent study by Kajiteta has introduced the fact that individuals below a certain poverty line struggle to apply for welfare benefits. Like there's a gap in information, there's an inability to access these benefits. Things which can be easily solved, which aren't, and things which can improve the ability for people to access the systems in which they're solving them right now. Now, let's talk about the effects of living standards in UBI
UBI, because I think it's charitable to say that it guarantees a better living standard for people. There are two ways in which this is different. I think the first one is first. In a game theoretic context, if companies know that to a certain extent everyone in the country earns a certain amount, there's less competitive pressures to reduce prices, to compete. Why is that the case? I think the best case study here is to look at Emiratis who, well, basically earn universal basic income. If you're a citizen, you get a certain amount. But yet the state spends so much money on public infrastructure that's free, state subsidies, which they don't actually need when you look at it, because individuals earn a set amount which is far greater than what they need to live every day. And the reason it goes to is twofold. The first is because companies just tend to charge higher, knowing that people's ability to pay are greater. But more importantly, I think, is that in many cases, what's important isn't your absolute amount of income, but the relative income average people earn. In their world, that doesn't change. Someone whose income differential is 1,000 ringgit between two individuals, that doesn't change if both of them earn the same amount after these payments. And what happens then is that individuals are just unable to be as happy. When they completely compare between two people, it's the same thing. Nothing changes in your world, you just desire more things, and you can't get those things because you don't earn enough. That is why we prefer not to give money to the richest. We target them to people who really need it. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. The next, let's invite the government whip. Here.
It's been far too long. We have tried to rectify these problems in welfare. Note that side opposition agrees to the welfare system. Despite all the problems that we have told you in my two speakers' speech, they've never told us once how the welfare system will become better, or the welfare system will be giving or targeted individuals like what they wanted, more freedom, more empowerment to exercise their choices in society. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things, right? But first, let me just point out their problem. Their problem is with free money towards the ultra-rich. We've already told you that it's a basic right for you to gain a salary in the form of UBI, universal basic income. So what does this mean? We are fine with giving the ultra-rich 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 ringgit more if it means we also get to tax them a lot more. Okay, because we have mentioned we're going to increase the taxation amount, the rate, and etc. Which means the funding towards our UBI system is still there. It is replenishable and it's always sustainable and it's always ongoing. We're fine with also capping the personal income of these ultra-rich individuals if it also means that we get more money to the targeted poor people that they wanted. We are also fine with varying the interest, with varying the rates towards that goes into UBI. So we're fine with all these mechanistic problems. We can rectify it on our side. The issue or the actual principle in today's debate, given feasibility, given that we can do it, should we then do it? They never answered that in their speech. Let me tell you why welfare does not work and cannot work. The problem with welfare is bureaucracy. I just started. It's bureaucracy and it's corruption. It is where you have to assess each individual's needs, which means you have to constantly interview people. It is very complex to sit in an individual down and ask him, are you looking for a job? Because the government will not simply give you free money if you don't have the initiative to also then utilize that money or to make your own money in the future. That's number one. They'll also answer things like, how many people do you have to like how many children do you have, what's your dependency at home, and etc. Right? So these are all the extensive barriers that government has put onto people. So it's not that they don't know, they know, but they are unable or they don't want to access this because of the barriers and the structural problems that the government already has. That is why we think it is high time we give you direct money, regardless of the means you are in, regardless of your status, regardless of what you can do or how many people you have to fend under your care. Justification. We live in a capitalistic society where we have formulated that you are entitled to something only if you work hard for it. We reject that under our side. We don't think that just because you have to work hard for it, it proves or validates or is a prerequisite to you gaining this access or this right from the government. We have told you time and time again in the two speeches before mine that these people who we're talking about are people who are of the birth lottery, who have immutable characteristics, people who are transgenders in society, who will not get the job just because they're transgender in Malaysia, people who are of color in the US, who would not get a job in comparison to one individual, people who are women, who will not get the job in India because they are women. You know, that is why the Indian government had this SME loans. I don't know if you guys heard of it. It's to help women entrepreneurs who are aspiring to have businesses. And we think we would have that in our system, and we will only amplify that even further by giving you a basic income for you to feel financially secure, which is my second issue, but before that.
So, assuming that the government can decide what the minimum threshold is above the poverty line for a universal basic income, why does this not apply to targeted forms of welfare?
I just said in my speech, because of the structural barriers and the complexity of the entire process, which even if you can rectify under your side, people will still not go because of the length of time it takes, because of the possibility that you will not get it, and your application will be rejected. Okay, cool. Next, moving on. Why do we think it's important? Even if people are unhappy, even if the poor people are unhappy, we don't care. As a government, what we want is for society to feel comfortable, to grow together, to have financial empowerment, and etc. What do I mean by this, right? This directly clashes with what he talked about, company exploitation. How companies right now will know that you get a basic income and will, give you lesser money or give you lesser salary because they can exploit that notion. We think when you get a basic income, you are in a better off position. You are in a more empowered position to negotiate with these companies, because you can actually tell them, like, Shell, you're not paying me enough, and I think I'm entitled to reject your job offer because probably Petronas will pay me a lot better. This not only allows people to negotiate and say that, I don't have to choose you because I'm scared if I don't choose you or don't take up the job offer, I'm left with nothing. This allows people to access the myriad of choices. It also allows them to remember the value that they have as a human being. We told in my my team's first speaker's speech, that just because you are of a certain immutable characteristic, that does not deny you the right or does not deny you the ability to gain access to these things. We think living a decent life and having a basic universal income is a prerequisite to you being happy and to you having value gain in society. We think you don't have to have Starbucks every day like Patrick, a friend of mine. You can have 2 meals a day, live under a roof. You don't have to live in a luxurious mansion. And we think just for those reasons, we want to instill trust and confidence again in these people. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Whip, for that debate, for that speech. And for the last speech of this debate, we would like to invite the opposition to hear him.
Test. All right. Poverty doesn't just look like a negative balance in a bank account. It looks like that single mother that will not be able to receive pay when she goes on maternity leave. It's about your African American that when tries to look for a job is discriminated based on their color. Poverty looks like the structural barriers that disallows people economic opportunities. But on the side government, it is a world where they hide behind these problems and say, it's all right, you have a universal basic income, you should be okay. It is only on the side negative, where you allow people to push and the incentive for them to fight for the kind of equality in jobs and in the economy that they deserve. There are 2 questions that I will answer in my speech. Number 1, is welfare more inefficient than the UBI system? But secondly, will UBI fix poverty and a lot of the structural barriers that occur in the economy? First question, is welfare more inefficient than the UBI system? This mic is really in my face, so wait, all right. So the first claim that came under side government is that welfare systems are very expensive, and therefore is not an efficient means of redistributing wealth. The first response to this is that it's just factually untrue. It is significantly cheaper to use welfare as it is targeted to specific groups of individuals, as opposed to a UBI system that literally gives it to everyone. A good example of this is in Taiwan, when they proposed a similar UBI system that side government wanted, in which they said that they would have a 31% increase in taxation to the top, to half of the middle incomers within their own country. In Finland, UBI costs 14 trillion of their currency, as opposed to the welfare system that is only about 1 trillion ringgit. So for them to say that it's a lot cheaper is a lie. But secondly, Navi give you a bunch of reasons as to why practically it cannot work. UBI systems are just inefficient. For two reasons. Number one, they told you that a lot of countries, in particular Malaysia, is cutting back on welfare benefits simply because the government revenue and from taxation is not large enough. But secondly, a lot of countries face severe tax evasion, which your UBI is heavily contingent on. What is the conclusion to this issue? We prove to you that welfare systems are within the capacity of most developing countries. It is under your will when you give them a highly expensive burden for them to pay. The second issue, will UBI fix poverty? There's two claims that came out from side government. The first is that there's a rise in automation, which means that we need an alternative fast. The second thing they want to say is that it disincentivizes people to work. Let's talk about that second claim about disincentivizing people to work. The first thing to note is that this is a bit of a contradiction, because first you say that you disincentivize people to work, but then Sharon says that you also don't want criteria as to whether or not they're working or whether or not they have a job. So I don't know what is their stance on this. Let's talk about I think the first response to this is that I think it's a very disingenuous characterization of middle to low income demographics to just say that they will be lazy the moment that they get money from welfare, right? Because there are still countless incentives for people to continue working despite gaining welfare. The fact that they can get a promotion, the fact that they get fringe benefits like free education for their children, the fact that getting a job is that you're more likely to have societal acceptance. These are all incentives for us to show that people will still work despite getting welfare benefits. But even if it's true, what is their comparative? Because if your UBI is high enough to care for people who are displaced by automation and you give them a good living standard, then what is their incentive to work anyway? So if it's their problem that people are disincentivized to work, they are more disincentivized when you have a UBI system. The last claim, I'm so sorry, let me not take a POI because I have a lot to say. Not bad, okay? All right. Second claim is this idea about the rise of automation and structural changes in the economy. The first, and they say that you need to have an alternative because like robots are going to take over the world. The first response to this is that I really don't think it is as bad as they claim, for two main reasons. Number one, there's often a restructure in the way the economy works. In the sense that if one job is taken over by an automation, there will be an increase in the number of jobs in other sectors in which people will be displaced then. But secondly, there is a trend to show that innovation has been expanding at the same rate that society can follow and adapt to. The fact that more companies are open to higher severance packages the moment they're displaced by automation. The fact that a lot of companies implement things like retraining schemes where they can move into other jobs. This goes to show that I don't think like it's going to be like Terminator, like all the innovation will take over the world or whatever. I don't think it's that bad. But the second response, that even if this is true, I think the problem is a lot worse on their side for the argument that Naveen posited to you in his first speech. Naveen told you that there are structural barriers in society, things like gender discrimination, racial discrimination, or the harms of gentrification. In order to fix this problem, you need there to be a pressure to fix these structural reforms. For example, and I think this does not happen in their world. For example, in Finland, when they decided to implement this policy to a certain group of people, a lot of trade unions got very angry because they realized that they have less negotiating power and leverage when it comes to negotiating with the employers. What happens in their world is that a lot of people not only have less of an incentive to fight all the structural barriers like racism and sexism within the workplace, but the negotiating power is a lot weaker. Audience, we have been fighting this fight for very long. Recently, Google made sure that women get equal pay. A lot of universities are placing affirmative actions for minorities. This is a fight that we must continue, but under their world, it will die down, and that's something that I do not support.
We appreciate for the speech. Debate is over. Debaters can now close the floor and shake hands before we move on to the next forum. Well, we'll wait for my colleagues to set up the stage for the forum. I hope the audience loved the debate. I'm sure the panelists have a lot to say about the debate. They may do so in the forum later. While waiting for them, allow me to introduce you to the topic for the forum. B40, do we understand poverty in Malaysia? The phrase B40 has been used quite often in Malaysian public discourse. In order to provide a more comprehensive picture of how we assist the bottom 40% of Malaysians, MIDP brings you a forum comprised of industry leaders, policy and subject matter experts. According to the Department of Statistics, the percentage of Malaysia's incidence of poverty had fallen from 49.3% in 1970 to 0.4% in 2017, a record achievement over the last 50 years. With official statistics boasting almost no poverty in the economy, is a startling truth that international agencies' findings shows otherwise. According to a report published by UNICEF Malaysia on urban child poverty in Kuala Lumpur in March 2018, despite a national poverty rate of less than 1%, compared with India's poverty rate of 20%, the children in surveyed low-cost flats face high rates of malnutrition and poverty, with 99.7% living in relative poverty and 7% in absolute poverty. It found that 22% of children below the age of 5 are stunted, stunting or impaired growth stemming from poor nutrition and inadequate psychosocial stimulation can dramatically affect the child's cognitive abilities in later life. The study found that Malaysian children suffered from stunting more than those in Ghana, despite Malaysia's GDP per capita being 6 times higher. The study also revealed that 51% of children aged 5 to 6 were not attending preschool, at odds with the 11th Malaysia plan, which calls for 100% student enrollment beginning from preschool all the way up to upper secondary. The study revealed that 77% of the households surveyed had no savings and fewer than 4% received zakat or welfare department assistance. Why is this the case? How far has government policy taken us in solving these issues? How has it fallen short, and what can we do moving forward to address poverty? And we're in time for the forum. Audience, let's invite the moderator, Suri Cafe, the panelists, Wan Yashin, Zami Zulkifli, Jan Farida, and Chris Rong, upon stage for the forum.
Okay, how's everybody doing? Good. You guys look so excited. Who stayed up to watch the game last night? Who's following the World Cup? Hello? Okay, we can be honest with each other, it's okay. And be intellectual in the morning and talk about poverty, it's fine. Okay, so first of all, welcome everyone to the panel B40. Do we understand poverty in Malaysia? My name is Suri Kemper. I am currently the program manager for Musawa, a global movement for justice and equality with the Muslim family. And I'm also with the G blog, which is how I know Amelia Sharif, so this is a quick plug for the G blog. I'm actually really, when I was asked to moderate this session, I was actually quite happy because this is like a little mini reunion of people that I know. Chris, I used to work with in UNDP. June kind of took over the position that both Chris and I had. They merged it into one, and then we had June was born. And Zame, you know, I've seen you on several panels as well. Yashin, I've never met, but I'm really glad to meet you. Okay, so we know that talking about poverty, we already know that the phrase B40 is something that is quite common to us in our public discourse, in the Malaysian public discourse and policy making. And as you heard earlier, the Department of Statistics has also noted that the incidence of poverty in Malaysia has fallen quite drastically, in fact, from 49.3% in 1970 to 0.4% in 2017. So it's almost like don't have poverty. it sounds like, right? And yet, several big news items that we see every day, and what we encounter in our day-to-day realities seems to contest this truth. So, for example, the UNICEF report that you heard about, which spoke about urban child poverty. Education is an issue because children from low-income households tend to go to lower-performing schools, have trouble accessing quality education, etc. There are employment and social safety net issues. So the poor typically work in the informal sector, and the informal sector tends to come with less social security benefits, health benefits, and usually, ironically, the poor find themselves paying premium rates for healthcare. We also have, over the last week or so, we heard about the death of the 5-month-old baby, Adam Raikal. And this really, for me at least, highlighted the issue of the inaccessibility and unaffordability of quality childcare. And this is something that is experienced predominantly. It's a much bigger issue for people from low-income households, right? Because both parents are working and you usually have to opt for the cheapest childcare option that is available to you in your surrounding neighborhood. So, and the other big thing that's been in the news has been child marriage. Child marriage is something that afflicts people from low-income households way more than it afflicts people from rich families. Yeah, that's just a statement of fact there. So all of these day-to-day experiences seem to somewhat counterintuitive to the fact that poverty has somehow disappeared, that we have no poverty in Malaysia. And so working with me to discuss this topic, really, I have an amazing set of panelists. And I wanted to start with a basic question. And the debaters touched on this earlier. So I have with me Chris. Chris is currently working with is currently with Khazanah Research Institute. He is the Deputy Director of Research. As I mentioned, we also used to be colleagues in UNDP. And in UNDP, at least, we worked a lot on poverty, in the area of poverty and on the B40, but we also touched on care work and care responsibilities, which you're also working on now, I understand, yes? Zame, you are the co-founder and managing director of Teach for Malaysia, referenced several times during the debate, and which you founded in 2009. For those unfamiliar with Teach for Malaysia, it partners with the Ministry of Education and the private sector to impact the lives of students by empowering young people to be leaders in the classroom and beyond, and mobilizing Malaysia to transform our nation through education. And so it's massive now. TFM has actually grown in leaps and bounds. It has over 350 fellows and alumni and impacts more than 78,000 students in over 100 schools across 10 states. June Jabbar is currently, like I said, the child of Chris and I's position at UNDP. She is the program manager of inclusive development and growth. And her portfolio actually looks at enhancing growth in Malaysia inclusively with a primary focus on issues faced by the B40 and those who are left behind. And this is the part which June inherits from me, which is the work on gender empowerment and youth engagement, as well as stateless and undocumented persons, persons with disabilities, and other marginalized communities. Yashin Quigley is the Assistant Research Manager and Social Policy Analyst at IDEAS, which is the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. And her research interests include social policy, education policy, social protection, poverty, and inequality. As most of our panel, and she has also worked with UNDP on the Malaysian Human Development Report, the 2013 Human Development Report. So without further ado, after introducing the panelists, let's get started. I wanted to touch on the definition of poverty, or what is the poverty line. This is something that the panelists the debaters touched on, but I don't know if we actually understood if an explanation was given to the audience about what the poverty line is. How does Malaysia currently measure poverty? How does it determine poverty? Chris, can I get you to comment on that.
Yeah, hi. First of all, I want to thank MIDP, the organizers, for inviting me to speak in this forum. It's good to be here amongst friends to share stage again. Now, on the question of poverty, even I think that the title of the forum is about B40, do we understand poverty here in Malaysia? My take on this is I think we are using some of these terms interchangeably, but in actual fact, in terms of policy and all that, it's actually quite different. So let me just give a bit of backdrop to this. I think the whole concept of the B40 was first introduced in the 8th Malaysia Plan. That was back in 2001, 2005. At that time, they called it the bottom 30%, not bottom 40%. And I think in the 9th plan, is somehow switched it to the bottom 40%, and that's the term that we're using until today. And that term was introduced at the time when the poverty rate was reducing. I think towards the end of the 8th plan period, we are looking at the poverty rate of about 5.96%. And as was told by Suri, I mean, 2016 data shows that poverty rate is now 0.4%, which is almost non-existent. So the rationale of why B40 was introduced is because the poverty rate is just too low. The total number of households that are considered poor is about 30,000 households in Malaysia. So in terms of whether it is still meaningful for government to have programs to target these 30,000 households is even possible. And because of a lot of the real developmental issues that goes beyond income, therefore, I think the government introduced this whole concept of the B40. So the B40 the way we calculate B40 and the poverty line is actually quite different, because the poverty line has a very sophisticated methodology behind it. That is, you take things like the food basket and the non-food basket, you determine what goes into those baskets and the kind of calorie requirements that you need to meet those, and the income that you need to buy those calories. So there is an underlying thinking of basic needs and so on behind it when they calculate the poverty line. Now the B40 is a bit different because you basically take all the households in Malaysia, you line them up from those that have the lowest income to those with the highest income. You take the 40th percentile, the bottom 40th percentile, and that's basically your bottom 40%. It's just basically an income cutoff. And I want to say that I have some issues with the definition of the B40 as a way of classifying the poor for 3 reasons. The first reason is that the bottom 40% actually does not adjust for household size. So meaning to say that if you are a household that earns say 3,000 ringgit, and you are a one-person single-member household, it means if you come out to work in Kuala Lumpur, you rented a house all by yourself, your starting salary is 3,000 ringgit, you're considered B40. But let's say there's another family of 8, father, mother, 6 kids, living in somewhere in Setapak or whatever, Wong Semaju. In the B40 definition, these 2 groups are actually the same, whether you're 1% household or 8% household. So it doesn't adjust for household size. And the second issue actually is it doesn't adjust for cost of living. So if you earn 3,000 here in Kuala Lumpur or if you earn 3,000 in somewhere in Kelantan, again, you're both B40. And just to give you a bizarre fact, if you earn 6,000 ringgit household income, in Kuala Lumpur you're considered as a B40, but in Kelantan you're considered as a top 20. Simply because the average and the median wage of median household income of Kelantan is a lot lower. So does it make sense? And finally, I think the bottom 40% is a huge group of people. You're talking about 2.78 million households. And by definition, it's 40% of the Malaysian population. Does it make sense to be targeting? I mean, there's this whole debate about universalism and targeting, which I can talk about a bit more later. But I think, does it make sense to be targeting 40% of our Malaysian population? And there's some really real trade-off here. I mean, if the allocation for development expenditure, I mean, let's say there's 7 billion that government spends on BRIM, and this is divided by 40% of the population versus if you can divide this by, say, 10% of the population, the subsidy per unit that each household gets will be actually very, very different. So I think there's some real trade-off. And this whole discussion about how we measure poverty, how we identify the poor, is an important discussion because it is quite technical and upstream, but it has a lot of implications on the downstream.
Thank you. See, this is why I love Chris, because he just breaks it down really easily. And I was always like, whenever I got confused, I just went to him and I was like, you need to break this down for me. Which brings me to my next question. you mentioned that income isn't the only way of measuring, we're still in a little bit of background, yeah? Income isn't the only way to measure deprivation or need, poverty, for example. And I know the government in the 11th Malaysia Plan introduced something called the Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index. Can you talk a little bit? Can you explain that a little bit? Just so we have a grasp on what we're talking about when it comes to poverty.
So the thinking about the MPI, or the Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index, I think that was first introduced in the 11th Malaysia Plan, is that you begin to think about poverty and deprivations beyond income. That means you don't just take 3,000, 4,000 kind of cutoff, but you take some of these non-income dimensions like health, education, living standards as a way to identify different areas of deprivations. So the education, if somebody doesn't have secondary education, can we consider this person as deprived in terms of education? If this person doesn't have access to health, let's say you live like 5 kilometers away from the nearest hospital or clinics, can we consider this person as deprived? Or housing condition, that means you're not using flush toilet, but you're still using porta toilet in your house. So the different indicators that we can look at using the basic amenity survey to sort of put this together into different dimensions. And so the totality of those dimensions will then, a way of aggregating this and to say that this person is multi-dimensional poor in this area, and this area. And I think in the MPI that was introduced, there's also some thinking about also putting in an income dimension. That means it's not to say income is not important, because there's a lot of correlation between income and non-income deprivations as well. So I think there's a lot of plus point to this MPI in terms of how we think about poverty, how we target, how we identify. But whether the cutoff that we use for each of these areas of deprivation is sufficient to reflect the aspiration of Malaysian society is something that I think we need a broader conversation with different segments of society.
Great, thank you, Chris. And that seems like a perfect entry point into the rest of the panelists, because as we said, poverty is somewhat the linchpin that pulls all of these different issues together, and we all work in different areas. So in your line of work, what are some of the issues that you're working on which intersect with poverty and are affected by poverty? And what are some of the challenges that you think those, I don't want to use the term B40, but those from lower income households seem to experience in your different areas? Zamir, do you want to start?
Hi, thanks. Actually, so I'm going to be sharing more observations that I've seen. I think I'm a bit nervous speaking in front of the debating society because it's all about facts. So I need to put that caveat out there. And also, I think all the policymakers are a bit more data-driven. So I'll just be sharing a bit more observations that I've seen. Coming to your question was about how do we see it come alive, right? So Teach for Malaysia, what we do is we recruit, train, and place young professionals and graduates with high leadership potential in underprivileged schools. But the fact is, we don't know which ones are the underprivileged schools based on household data, because I think that's protected under OSA. So it's not readily available, number one. So then we look for the academic and examination results. And as soon as we found that, there's the ranking with all 10,000 schools, they put them into 7 bands, and we go into band 4, 5, and 6. Oddly enough, there's no school in band 7 at the moment. So it follows the whole poverty line with only 0.4% similarities there. In the band 4, 5, and 6, majority of the kids that we serve is then in the B40 community, but because at the school level, they then have that household and income data that they collect, but it's not then centralized and shared very widely. So there's a bit of a data challenges that come into play. Now, what we see when it comes to poverty is what has been mentioned over and over: gender discrimination, health, mental health as well. I think there's a separate panel happening at the same time, as well as nutrition, access, and probably I want to share the fact that there are almost 70 or 80 people in this room. My guess is most of you went to university or are attending university, but from the general population, only 20% of Malaysians went to university. There is another 20% of Malaysians almost every year that do not even pass SPM. They don't get that secondary education. Why is this? And the stats that we see coming up, we can always read it, but how do we actually experience what is happening on the ground? So that's why Teach Malaysia puts people for 2 years in the community to experience, because that experience can't be quantified. And it's only when you feel it and experience it that you will truly understand. And I probably want to share a story where I did end up I always do school visits, classroom visits, and then we always follow up with a community visit. And we spent half a day with families. And we were in this I was in this house where the father was suffering from stage 4 lung cancer. He had 3 children. 2 of the girls were actually on the path to getting a tertiary education, but the boy had decided to drop out. And the boy dropped out just because he felt he doesn't have a future or influences of drugs and crime in that area. And while we worry about gender at our scale, I think, of the economic ladder, there's a separate gender issue happening at the bottom rungs, where there's a lost boy syndrome happening, where boys actually lose out on education very early on. So I don't know where to stop off at this point, but maybe I'll just end it with that simple story that sometimes, of all the challenges that were happening, I then asked the father, why do you believe in this, with all your challenges, you're still doing everything to send your kid to school? Because the youngest daughter was then saying, I don't want to go to school because I want my father to spend money on his health care as well. Like, I don't want to go to university, I'm going to start working and contributing to my father because I want to help him get better. And the father then said, no, you are going to go, because at some point in his career, this was a rural school in Kedah, by the way. At some point in his career, he was then working in Penang, and he was working as a security guard in a university. So he then had exposure to what the power of education was. And despite the community back in Kedah, most of them wanted their kids to just drop off and work. And despite having stage 4 cancer, he was then saying, I want you to get an education because that's the key. Thank you.
Thank you, Zamir. Yashin? And then we'll go to Julia.
Yeah, so for ideas, we actually have a survey done in 2013 on giving voice to the poor. So there's a few main findings basically. So it's 1,200 households that we surveyed. And then one of the main findings is that there's information gap. Basically, what the government's policies on education doesn't flow down to the parents, basically. When Malaysia Education Blueprint did a consultation, it was attended by the Parents-Teacher Association, but very, very few B40 parents or the special needs children parents attended those consultations. So that is a gap between what's happening on the top and also what the poor is getting to know. Then the second thing is aid is not reaching the poor. So there is also the financial burden part, where of course school fees is already free and that's workbooks. But there's also other financials like transportation, uniform, and also in terms of parents, like B40 parents do think that there is a need for supplementary like tuition. So that is also, they feel burdened and they feel like pressured to give their children this tuition. So they also feel bad because they couldn't afford to send their kids for tuition. So that's the second main finding. The third main finding is dropouts. So out of the 1,200 samples, 150 has children that has dropped out of the education system. So, and the interesting finding is that one of the main reasons of dropout is actually lack of interest. It's not really financial burden. Financial burden was, I think was third, but main reason is because they don't have interest in school. And there's also discriminatory practices in school, especially towards the children with poor performance, poor academic performance. So another thing that was highlighted was the orang asli dropout rate, which was quite high. So 25% dropped out during the transition from primary to secondary. and then 26% drop out in secondary school. So if you go to the Orang Asli village, you realize that just to go to school, they might have to take, they might have to leave at 4 a.m. in the morning and go through the muddy roads to reach their schools in outside or maybe in the suburbs. So those are the things that the children faced. Yeah. So there's also this lack of interest for them as well, and where the school environment is very different for the Orang Asli children from their own culture. They might not be able to adapt to the school culture easily. So that there might be like physical punishment, which to them is something that is very new and they couldn't take it basically. So those are things that like indigenous people, children have to face on top of what are the other challenges in terms of quality education. Like what are the teachers in rural areas? Usually the not performing teachers are sent to the rural areas. So these are the things that they face. Yeah. So the fourth finding for that is that education expenses. Yeah, which I mentioned earlier. And the fifth one is parents actually want to have school choice. So now when they register for school, MOE will assign them. But actually parents will prefer to have school choices, and actually they do think that private education is much better, like private schools are much better. Of course, there is also this studies done in other countries that look at the perception of private institutions. So when they pay for something, parents tend to think that is better. Of course, that is also subject to whether do they truly know how's the system like in private sector. Yeah. So these are some of these findings of this giving voice to the poor. Yeah.
June, what about you? Tell us how your work intersects with poverty.
Okay. So actually, what Zamir and actually what Yashin highlighted in terms of the issues faced by the bottom 40 is also similar to what we have found and also what we have been working on. So I'll just build up a bit on that. So on top of that, we also found that in our work with the bottom 40, of course, there's increased cost of living that they're facing at the moment, but also they highlighted that they felt that there's an ineffectiveness in terms of the government services delivery. So this is where they felt that it can be improved, and they felt that they're being left out in this process. And then, so a lot of bottom 40 also, we look at Orang Asli in Peninsula and Orang Asal in Sabah Sarawak. Yes, it's been highlighted by my fellow panelists here, but for us, we felt like one of the underlying things that's the cause of them not having access to healthcare education is the simple fact that they are, some of them are undocumented. They don't have registration. There's no birth registration. You don't have ICs. And some of them are even Malaysians, which does not allow them to continue school up to the primary level. Even if there are schools that are within the vicinity, it's usually hampered by logistical reasons. For example, one of the schools in Sabah, in one of the remote areas, there's one school in one kampung, but the children would have to go and stay at the boarding school by boat normally, and it takes them about an hour by boat to reach that. And to have children as young as 7 all the way to 12 to live in boarding school in a remote area away from their parents, it's a bit heartbreaking when you see that. Of course, also data is a big problem as well, because the household data doesn't quite capture those who are undocumented and those who are deemed statelessness. So they are also very much forming the bottom 40 simply because they just don't earn enough. And a lot of our findings as well, we find that there's gender discrimination as well, in terms of women not being able to enter the workforce, or women having to spend more time on children, elderly, unpaid care, which doesn't allow them to be part of the workforce. From what the stats have said, women actually spend roughly about 2 to 3 hours more a day, even if they are working, to spend time to take care of their children or their elderly as well. So, those sort of things that we find does actually, it's a challenge for us to actually include women more in the workforce. And also like the challenges that we said before, like when we talk about 140, it's interconnected. And at the end of the day, if you don't have registration, you're not going to have access to all this.
Chris, what about you? I mean, you touched on care work, and you do some care work now as well. Some research in care work as well. Can you talk about that and how it intersects with poverty?
So we have been looking at the gender gaps in the labour market quite a bit, specifically looking at labour force participation and also wage gap. So I mean, I think it's quite intuitive. We know that this is happening. So if you look at labour force participation, it is improving for women, but men is still at about 81%. Women is at about 52% right now in terms of labour force participation. Wage gap across all sectors, men earn a slight premium as compared to women. But I think what is interesting for us is currently we are seeing, we are looking at it in terms of the life cycle, that means the age group. And we find that actually the gap on labour force participation and wage actually increase as you grow older, basically. That means when women become older or you move to an older age group, the gap in labour force participation and wages actually increase. So very interestingly, on wage specifically, when we look at when you first join the labour force, women actually earn slightly more than men on average. But when you move to, say, when you're 30 and above, the gap suddenly change. Men suddenly become like higher earners compared to women. So why is that the case? We have a hypothesis, but we cannot really prove it yet, and that has got to do with the care question. We need to say that it has got a lot to do with issues of childcare or elderly care because of the current demographic position that we're in. So in the sense that I think the average marriage age for Malaysian women is about like 29 to 30 or so. So you get married around that time, you get your first kid when you're in your early 30s, and more often than not, because of social norms and the kind of disparity in the labour market, women will be the ones to sort of exit the labour force. And you may re-enter the labour force at a later stage, say after 5 years when you start to send your kids to preschool and whatnot. But then the years of experience that you have compared to men in the same age group is less. So of course, then it's only natural that the employer will want to pay you less. So it's not the kind of explicit type of discrimination that you see, but it's how some of these play into household decisions about who to stay back to take care of kids or elderly or people with disabilities. That sort of drive the kind of gaps that we see in the labour market. And I think that the care question is important. Suri mentioned it a bit, and how we deal with that. And of course, if you bring in the care question and how that intersects with poverty is even more crucial, because if you're from the middle class or the top 20%, you have care options, like you can hire a foreign domestic worker, you can send your kids to registered childcare centres and whatnot. But for the bottom 40% or the poor, that kind of options are not available. And most of the time they are in the informal sector anyway, so they have to take on the double burden of having to work, the income question, and also to deal with the issues of childcare. So it's very real, and I think my fellow panelists can testify to that with their encounters with the B40 households.
I think, I know I'm a moderator, but I just want to make this comment. So for me, it's really interesting that if you're in the T20, if you're in the top 20%, you actually outsource your care work, you hire additional help. But it's then interesting how that care burden gets transferred. So even when we transfer that care work onto a domestic worker, and it's a foreign domestic worker, back in her home country, it's either then her mother or somebody else who then has to take it. So, it's really interesting, these global networks of like how poverty then gets linked and entrenched across global boundaries. Anyway, that's just, but so it's really interesting, yeah, that poverty really entrenches decisions about healthcare, like Zamir was talking about this father who made conscious choices about what to fund. It was either his children's future, or his own health and survival. So those are decisions that, if you're not bound so much by poverty, you don't face those choices, right? it is either, it is about the fact that there is a dropout, a lack of interest, which causes children predominantly from poor households to drop out from schools. And it's interesting the way we also talk about lack of interest among children from low-income households. It almost sounds as if it becomes personalized, right? Like, oh, it's not a structural problem, it's just that the children weren't interested. But why aren't the children interested is a question. So, I mean, maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, thanks. So the quality of an education system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers. Right? That one is a fact. There's a lot of data to prove it, so I can say that. And I think the other, June and Yashin also shared in terms of the challenges of getting kids to school. But learning, the only way to improve learning is to improve instruction in the classroom. And that's where learning happens. You can get students to school if they overcome all the barriers that they've managed to overcome, and then when they're in school, but there's still a large group that doesn't learn when they're there. And that's what Teach Malaysia is doing slightly differently. We are focusing a lot more on the leadership development of teachers. And it's not about whether I know math, science, or history, and it's not about imparting knowledge, but it's about creating a learning environment in which the child, regardless of their background, understands why they are learning, how to learn, and what to do with that knowledge. Now, everyone always asks me, what do you want to change with the new minister and the curriculum? It's not the curriculum, it's not the classroom size, it's not the even subject that we need to change. We just really need to just focus on this learning aspect, which a lot of people don't know how to grasp. And it's about then shifting the power dynamics as well, because I think one thing we haven't really touched on as well is power dynamics. So from a leadership perspective, we are then training our fellows to let go of some of their biases and assumptions about leader and the role and definition of teachers, to then see that students have a lot more power within themselves. So how do we then shift power to be shared and even shift it a lot more to the students for them to then take on the onus of learning and pursuing what they want? We train our participants for 2 months on this intensively and then 2 years, so it's a bit hard for me to condense that training aspect now, but that's the concept of it in that sense, right? There's so many things to touch on. So there's also, so then the interesting part as well, like about care and women about care, it just prompted me to think about the teachers and the role of teachers in society as well, right? If you ask someone what their job is, and if they say teacher, and then it'll be like a very harsh reaction, like I don't want to talk about teachers. But if you ask them about their education, they're going to love talking about their education. But society also, currently in Malaysia, we don't place a premium on teachers. When we first started out, or even now, when we're recruiting participants, the number one thing that always comes up is, my parents don't want me to be a Teach Malaysia fellow or a teacher because I won't get a job afterwards. And if you think about that, the women that then take a step back and focus on childcare, there is a lot that happens in that time, that skills that they develop can't be quantified at the moment. And I think there might be a space for us to work on quantifying the leadership skills and the aspects that they develop in that experience, because that's what Teach Malaysia just did. We quantified and rebranded teaching to be leadership, and suddenly someone that graduated from Taylor's doing business and administration, his name is Calvin Tan, and he shared the story. When he graduated from Taylor's, he applied to PwC and he didn't even get an interview. Thankfully, we interviewed him in TFM, and he taught for 2 years. After that, we sent out the CV book around, because one of our benefits is like, how do we make sure that there is a career path for teachers? We sent the CV book around, and then PwC called him for an interview, right? And he got the job, and he ended up working there for 3.5 years. So part of Teach Malaysia is just a remarketing or marketing strategy as well, but focusing on some core elements of leadership and change, which is about mindsets that can't be quantified just yet. And mindsets are shown, and particularly an example of mindset is a growth mindset. Again, very big difference between the T20, M40, B40. Do you believe that the skills that you are born with can change over time? An example of that is when I started, when I was in school, even though I had the privilege of coming from a middle to high income family over time, when I started in school, I thought I was good at maths and science and that's it. Even public speaking was something that made me very nervous and I said, I'm never going to do it. Until I went to university, I then saw my fellow engineers that were playing classical piano, and then another one was playing the violin simultaneously. And I was like, wow, I thought this only existed in movies. Maybe I can try working on different things. So how do you have a growth mindset to understand that success comes with hard work, learning a new skill, developing a new networks as well? That is all about putting in the hard work to open up those opportunities. Yeah. So just waving at Farah, she's a former staff member, and Hazin, who gave all the shout outs, because Teach Malaysia, actually what we operate on a movement basis, like what you had mentioned, and our theme song sometimes is Hotel California. You can check out but never leave. So that's why she's still, and Hazin still supports Teach Malaysia in so many different ways. So I think I'll just stop there.
I want to shift it a little bit and talk about, both of you touched on Orang Asli and Orang Asal. One of the things that we encountered when, as part of UNDP, we did a national tour or a roadshow. It wasn't a roadshow, it was more like a national consultation, right? And in one of those consultations, or was it two, we specifically work with Orang Asli communities. And when we were in Sarawak, one of the feedback that we got was, you know, the state coming on and then saying, state government saying, you know, we work with the Penan and we try and give them all this, we try and give them a better quality of life. We try and we build houses for them. We build houses for them, you know, several houses so that they can move the entire village to this particular new location. Next week when we come, they've torn the house apart and used it as firewood. We bring vegetables, we bring, you know, bring someone to the village and teach them how to plant vegetables so that they can cultivate plants, right, for food. And then they say, the next day, they're like, everything is just all over the place and they've completely not planted or taken care of any of the seeds. They say, we bring chickens, we bring chicks. Orang Penan tu angkat ayam tu, dia kata, why didn't you bring me a grown chicken? At least I can eat it. You know, but it really emphasized to me that in some cases, communities have different ideas of what it means to be developed and what a good quality of life is, right? They're different. So if a community doesn't want to live in a village, if the Penan are used to living within the forest, and that is where what is this pointing with the finger? Oh, not me, okay. He was doing this and I was confused. So, you know, if a community doesn't share the same definition of what it means to alleviate poverty, of what it means to achieve a better quality of life, that's the state. How do we reconcile that? How do we negotiate that terrain? I mean, both of you, from both your perspectives, you with ideas and with UNDP. Can you please comment?
Yeah, I think what Shuri had said was quite true. When I was in the Orang Asli kampung, so the government built brick houses for them with zinc roof. So it looks pretty, like everyone has one, but they built their own house behind that brick house. So then I asked, why is that? Why didn't they stay in there? And the reply was because it's so hot in the afternoon. They can't stay in their house in the afternoon. That's why they built the extension, and practically they just stay in the extension. So what is that brick house for? It's just that, and maybe sometimes they stay in there. Yeah, so there's a mismatch between their way of living and what the government gives them. I think there's a lack of like understanding of their needs and also their culture. It's more like a top-down thing where you just, this is development, what you should have, rather than understanding what are their needs. I think it's the same with education as well, because in mainstream education, hardly do we ever know what's the culture of our Orang Asli indigenous people. They're so diverse, there's so many tribes and different languages, but when do we ever hear about it? Do we even know about it in our syllabus? That's the mismatch in terms of that, what the policies are and what is their way of life. So imposing it on them makes them feel like, this is not what I want, and why should I go for it? So that's one of the main factors. Yeah.
Thanks, Siri. So I'm, their brainchild of the consultations that we've done. So I think this is why, moving forward for UNDP specifically, we enhance a lot on having participatory approach. That's a mouthful. So we whenever consultations are done, I mean, traditionally people always think that we talk directly to the government and state government, but now a lot of consultations are underground, so every level of input or feedback will be taken into it. And I've seen myself, in Sabah, in one of the villages that I went, this was actually with my past life with UNICEF, but it still fits into UNDP work. They build dams, but they also ruin the Orang Asal houses. So the first thing they cut up the trees, and then when they build the dams, the houses are actually flooded when it rains. So by default, it really shows that there is no talks, only discussions on the ground, will this dam actually be beneficial for the Orang Asal? So in essence, also, they're also sort of, it's destroying a hard word, but it's sort of changing the landscape of what the Orang Asal are used to. And a very funny example as well is that they built houses and toilets for the Orang Asal, but the door was placed upside down and the lock was on the outside versus the inside. So I mean, from there you can always see, you can really see yeah, exactly. So you're going people lock from the outside, right? So then you can really see that, and then the community there will be like, oh, we don't use that, we just use that place for storage. Because would you live with a door with the lock on the outside versus the inside? So this is where getting the consultations on the ground, getting inputs, getting feedbacks, and ongoing monitoring and follow-ups is very important when we want to actually roll out or find out issues on the ground.
Chris, I know you had a comment. Yes.
So during the formulation of the SDG, the Global Indigenous Peoples Group, and this is not Malaysia, it's global, they submitted a memorandum to Helen Clark, who was then the administrator of UNDP. And in that memorandum to Helen Clark, the demands of the indigenous people is not to solve my poverty problem or help me to get out of the poverty trap and all that, but it is actually to ask the SDG to be formulated in a way where you respect protect our way of life and also to recognize our territory and our land. And I think given the fact that the livelihood and the way of life of the Orang Asli indigenous people community is so intertwined with nature and environment. And I think that, and not just that, I think even social identity of the indigenous people, how they identify themselves is so intertwined with environment and nature. So I think the way we think about development for this particular group has to be distinct. And unfortunately, I think my criticism of the SDG is that when we say that we want to leave no one behind, we tend to think of that particular modern vision of development only. And I think this is where we have to bring back the whole UN DRIP discussion here, the United Nations Declarations of Indigenous People, which Malaysia actually is a signatory, where one of the recommendations of the UN DRIP is the free, prior, informed consent in terms of how we do development. So the whole idea of FPIC, free, prior, informed consent, has to be part of any development projects. But the question, I mean, we have a lot of consultations and all that. I think that the real question is how do we make sure some of these consultations are actually meaningful when it comes to engaging with the Orang Asli. And I think that's the key when we think about the Orang Asli issues.
I think I really enjoyed what Chris mentioned there. And I would challenge us to also consider maybe the direction that we're setting as a society is actually really, really wrong. There's a lot of wisdom that we can find in the Orang Asli community and how they organize and self-govern as well.
So we see, I mean, I think all panelists have really underscored the importance of these conversations. Top-down solutions really seem inadequate, right? And that these conversations of how to improve someone's quality of life or a community's quality of life is a reciprocal idea. It needs to happen and it needs to be defined through conversation, through interaction with people. I feel like this banner is slowly like creeping up behind me. It just came slowly and I was like, what? Anyway, so the idea of reciprocity and the idea of conversation between both the state and beneficiaries, quote unquote, it seems like a one-way direction. It's like a one-way street, right? But obviously, there needs to be a conversation that happens between both in order for a more holistic approach and solution to be discovered or worked on. Speaking of which, I want to take a little step back and talk then, since you've all touched on like these small instances of I think solutions or proposed solutions that are currently being implemented that don't work. What are some of the solutions towards alleviating the conditions under which the communities that you work with or reach out to operate? What are some of the solutions that you think have worked, that you've seen have actually produced positive results within your field of work? June, do you want to start? I want to start from you first. What solutions have worked for, that you've seen, have had an impact, have worked, have produced positive results? Because we know what doesn't work. And we're tired of what doesn't work, right? We want to know what instances have that you've experienced have actually been proven to produce positive results and affected and impacted the lives of the people that you work with.
I'm trying to think. I think, can I just touch on data very briefly first? Sure. Before I get to this? Yeah. I think when we're talking about 140, yes, the data's not as comprehensive as we want it to be, basically. But what made me happy in the sense that, for example, like the data that UNICEF has found, the Children Without report, that has actually put forward like, yes, poverty has improved to 0.4%, but however, there are still pockets of society, like children living in poverty, even though those living in poverty have been highlighted. And I feel that with that, it has been brought to the attention of some of the ministers at this point of time, which also has been put into action. So on our part, that has shown where data is quite strong and it has a powerful role to play in pushing forward an not agenda, but issue as an advocacy tool. Even a lot of efforts that's being put into combating child marriage now. I understand there's still lots of issues that's been going on, a lot of intricacies. However, because of the visibility of it now, a lot of actions are being considered to be taken into place. So for me, though that it doesn't really show a direct impact per se, but having that step is always a step forward for us to actually see that all the efforts have actually grown, and I know that eventually this will be addressed as well. Again, for me to comment so much on the direct impact is a bit more difficult because sometimes UN tends to work at a very policy level. So I don't particularly see on the ground, but that's why I touch more on the data bit that helps in our advocacy work. Yeah. Okay, Yashin?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've seen that has worked is more on community initiatives. So it's initiative that's organically grown from there, basically. So regarding the Orang Asli village, so that's the one that I went to. They actually started an education center in their village. And it's an initiative by them, it's not from the government. So they gather their own resources, and also the private sector, after that, knowing about their initiative, came in to help. I think those are the things that, you know, have to come from that, basically. So there's also another study that I guess is ongoing right now, which is an agricultural subsidy survey. So we went around to paddy field farmers. So one of the things that we realized that this is my observation, is the survey is still ongoing. So my observation of one particular area, which is Sakin Chan, they are quite independent in terms of, although they receive subsidies, but in terms of how they function as a community, their own initiatives, they go overseas to learn from other countries, they have trial and error experiments themselves rather than waiting for the government. Those are the things that work, and they do have better productivity than every warehouse that I've been to. So these are the things, they work together and then they leverage on technology, and it's the effort that they put in to make things work. I think rather than waiting for the government to come, their initiative is a better way forward, and the government could come in to help them and empower them when there's an initiative in this sense. Yeah, I think.
Thank you, Yashin. Zamir, we'll go with you, and then Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot later because I'm going to ask you to comment on a little bit more structural, like from a structural perspective. Yeah.
Right. So I'm a bit biased. I work in TFM, bought the t-shirt, and I wear the t-shirt every day. So my solution or success bet is that talent, culture, and leadership mindsets will be key to success. And you can then replicate this anywhere. You see most of the high-performing organizations, Google, McKinsey, Kazana, UNDP, always focus on the quality of the talent. Now, can we get the similar thing going in Malaysia? Yeah, Teach Malaysia has done it to a certain degree with a small group of people, but have we reached scale? Not yet. We're trying to. We're always recruiting. In fact, today is our last deadline to join the 2019 cohort. So hint, if anyone's interested. But I like the point that you mentioned around initiative, right? Power needs to be returned to the people that experience it the most. And as we sit here, or we sit in the audience thinking, do we understand B40? I'd like us all to ask a question. I won't put you guys on the spot to raise your hand or not, but do we believe they can solve their own problem? I'll admit, when I first started Teach Malaysia, I didn't think so. And it was over time that my thinking evolved a lot when we opened up initiatives at the student, fellow, alumni, and organization level. So at the student level, we run sort of like leadership camps for students that combine design thinking, problem solving, and students then identify and solve problems either in their school or local community. And the Sekinchan example, there was a group of kids that said the paddy fields were flooding too often. So they then designed a tool, they made themselves using technology that I don't understand, but it's Arduino or something like that. So the kids designed it, even the teacher didn't know what they were doing because they just facilitated the whole session. And the kids then designed a tool to detect flooding and then send a message to the phone if the paddy fields were flooding so that the parents could then address it. Right? Yeah. And it goes on and on in terms of some of the solutions. But the kids we serve from this B40 communities then participated in a national competition organized by MIDP for maker education. And 7 of our kids won out of like hundreds others coming from various other communities. And these 7 kids got a trip to Silicon Valley. Yeah. So think about the potential that's there. And think about, to enable that, we truly must let go of this mindset that we know what the solution is. Right? Now, at the fellow level, they then design even literacy programs that don't involve adults anymore. It involves Form 4 student mentoring, peer tutoring, a Form 2 student to develop in English. So suddenly, it's not one teacher working with 40 kids, working to teach 40 kids, but 41 people teaching each other. So the teachers also then design initiatives that then like become a loop. There's again like 50 or 100 other initiatives that our fellows design themselves for the local community based on areas of interest. There is a group of one, and again, it depends on the individual. So then there was an individual that was really into performing arts, a fellow that was really into performing arts. So he designed a musical that then emphasized on developing leadership skills, and then he worked with Georgetown Arts Festival for the kids that could present there. Parents were crying when they were seeing this for the first time, and never knew my kids could present or speak in English, let alone on stage with open to the public. Now, that's only done in 2 years. You had mentioned that teach, measure, and we put in our thing that our change model happens beyond the 2 years. What do our alumni do? To be a principal in the education system, and I'll talk about structural changes a bit within education. It takes an average 21 years to be a principal. Our alumni right now, with only 6 years of experience, there's about 6 of them training about 50 principals and whole schools on new methods of teacher instructional classroom and instructional leadership. So this is, I mean, let me just let that sink in. They only have 6 years of experience, but they're teaching someone with 20 or 25 or even 30 years of experience about what it takes to be an instructional leader to drive student outcomes. And that was also possible because of the credibility and understanding of the community they developed in the 2 years, but also because they were district officers and principals that were ready to let go of their mindset that I have the power. To then say, we have the power together, to then change the school for the children. We also have alumni that are writing national curriculum or even lesson plans for computer science curriculum that's being rolled out. We have alumni that's advocating for whole changes in school systems in which let's remove subjects and let's move towards project or thematic-based learning so that we're combining what's happening and we work in groups rather than on your own, and so that we then remove also that horrible thing called ranking of exams and individuals. I personally believe assessments are still important for development, but the Malaysian culture of exams as a competitive nature is shooting us in the foot in terms of our mental health of our students. Now I'll wrap up with some organizational changes because this can go on. So organizational changes, one thing we are trying to do as an initiative is to change the HR and talent policies in the Ministry of Education. Can it be merit-based? Can teachers or principals that are young, talented, be put in the more underprivileged spaces instead of just in the rich areas where they're comfortable with? And then how can we change the incentives to provide that change happening? I also, honestly, this is a bet that I'm still 50-50, and even Dr. Moses in the audience has challenged me, is that the right way? I actually think that there is a need for hyper decentralization in our education system. What I mean by this also, I think there's a need to just get rid of district officers, state officers, and even the federal level of the ministry. And we should move into sort of a regulated operator system, something like SSM or Securities Commission, and Securities Commission and companies, in which schools have their own board of trustees, principals can hire and fire teachers, the school inspectorate, the Nazir, which is the audit perspective, reports to Parliament as an independent organization. So that's the kind of initiatives that we're thinking about at an organization level, and we'll see what happens there.
Thank you. Chris?
That's a lot.
That's okay. Chris? I mean, we've heard solutions at the personal level, but how do these then feed into, for example, systemic solutions, right? Because how do they feed into the design of, say, solutions at the systemic level? Because what we have is, for example, solutions like RIM, we have solutions like those affordable housing schemes, internal, there are all these different schemes that are set up to quote unquote help the poor. So how do we take the initiatives that work at these individual levels and produce something that works? How do these feed into the design of, say, solutions at the systemic level, knowing, for example, that poverty is both structural and something else.
Yeah, there are a lot of things in there. So I want to be a bit provocative in the sense that I'm all for bottom-up community-based type of solution. We need to consult, we need to ask people on the ground, like their needs and so on. But I want to say that is also not sufficient. And just to give one example, so when we did the bottom 40 consultation, and so you're part of it, and one of the biggest feedback that we got from the bottom 40 community themselves is that there's a lot of anger and resentment towards low-skilled foreign workers in the country. And that's understandable because they face, the bottom 40 poor face the low-skilled foreign workers the most. So people like us, I'm not sure, we could be a bit more insulated from some of these encounters on a daily basis. And so they are very angry because they feel that they are taking away my EPR homes, they're taking away my jobs, they're getting licenses to do business in childcare, and so on, Petaling Strait. And we want them removed from the country, or we want to have a bus system where you give priority to Malaysians first, the kind of nationalistic demands. So a bottom-up consultation will give you that kind of input, which is understandable. But from the policy side, do you make a decision on whether to phase out foreign workers just based on this input or not? And this is where I want to do my pitch, because I come from a research institute, and I think it has to be evidence-based, it has to be properly researched, we have to look at data to understand the macro impact, whether in terms of the labor market, can we actually do with the kind of phasing out which sector and so on. So that's, one perhaps concrete example of how I think downstream needs to connect with the upstream in terms of the policy. I can give a lot of examples, and I think downstream, I'm not an expert. I know of friends in the audience as well who has done like fantastic work with NGOs and so on, community-based organizations on homelessness and whatnot. One example that I've come across in Kota Belud, one project, they started a community library there, again, based on community initiative, bring books, literacy to the children of the village, effective because they reach out to the village. But one of the challenges then was that actually there's a lot of surrounding villages which could have actually access to the same community library, but because of issues of roads, infrastructure, so they can't actually, they have to like walk 1 or 2 days for them to get this village. So some of these infrastructure issues which require solutions more at the policy level for you to fix in order for you to then scale up the impact of some of this community-driven work. And I think the question then is, how do we connect that dot between policy upstream and downstream? And I think it's a real challenge. I mean, people know that we need to do this. Downstream is to know we need to do this. But I think the real problem for me, actually for downstream, is issues of funding, issues of resources. I mean, for an NGO to be able to capture some of these experiences, convert this into a report, find a platform to present this, come up with slides which are nice and all that, needs money, needs research staff and all that. But where's the funding going to come from? So the strengthening of civil society organizations, CEOs, NGOs, comes down to this fundamental question of how you structure funding so that they can still operate independently to sort of reach a kind of policy impact. And of course, I think on the policy upstream side, it's about them letting go, learning to listen, to be humble, to know that we don't have all the solutions. And some of these feedback, how do you interpret that against more macro type of data and evidences?
That is perfect. Thank you. I've just did a time check. It's 12:15 and we have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to give the panelists an opportunity to maybe have some final words, give their final words before we open the floor up to questions from the audience, okay? Chris, since you're holding the mic, do you have any last words? Want to do questions first? Okay, let's do questions first. People, if you have questions, now is the time to ask them. Do we have a roaming mic?
Yeah.
No, we don't? Okay, so we do now. Do I have any questions? Don't be shy. Oh, we have one question over there. We have 2 questions. Let me take 2 questions in a row and then we'll have the panelists answer, okay? Ideally, I'd like to do 3, but please introduce yourself and give us the question. And if there is any specific panelist that you'd like to speak.
My name is Dr. Ahmad. I'm actually from Kuala Terengganu. I've got a question for Chris. Now we've talked about poverty, but the quoted figure now is official figure is 0.4%, which in this case, if it's true, poverty is a non-issue, but yet it is not so-called believable. Now, how did the government come up with this figure, 0.4% in the first place? Something that many of us do not believe. Thank you.
Thank you. Amelia, can you pass the mic down this way as well?
Hi, my name is Amelia. My question is also directed to Chris. I'm interested in letting mention about unpaid care work. Under status quo, what are the initiatives or the current policy or actions taken by the government, if there's any, to sort of like deal with this issue, or are we sort of like still apathetic towards this issue? Because we hear this a lot in conversations, but I've never heard like something in terms of like policy action or like big government actions to deal with this issue. So can you please like explain a bit if there's anything done on this particular issue?
Two questions. Shall we go for one more question? Since the hands up, we'll collect 3 questions.
Hi, my name is Jane, and I'm the founder for Active 60, where we believe that retirees and senior citizens has an active role to play in the society, and we stand for that. So my question is, coming from the space of social business, social enterprises, NGO, and charities, there are so many units in Malaysia that are fighting to solve problems for B40 and poverty people. And I was just wondering, like, what are really happening in the scene, and why do we have so many entities that are trying to solve the problem, but they're still like, there wasn't an ultimate improvement, or probably, I don't know, like, what are the measurements towards the success of social enterprises in Malaysia while trying to solve the issue? Thank you.
So coordination on B40 efforts. Who wants to? Does anybody want to take that question? Because I have 2 questions for Chris. Does anybody? You want to take the first 2 first? Okay.
So on the question of poverty line, of course we know now poverty line is about what, 900, 1,000, right? That's for Peninsular Malaysia, and then there's a separate line for Sabah and Sarawak. And that's actually the average poverty line. So actually, poverty line is actually adjusted for household size and cost of living. So that means if you have a larger household size, your poverty line could be even up to like 3,000 ringgit and so on. But this is the average of this is about 1,000. Now the poverty line and the poverty rate is low because it is based on a basic needs approach. Meaning to say that when the government actually calculated the poverty line, they actually got a nutritionist to come in to say that this is the minimum food requirements that you need in order to survive. It's not about living the kind of aspirations that that people might have, but it's about what is minimum that you need in order to survive. And from the food basket, then they will derive what they call the non-food basket. It means calculating things like clothes, transportation, housing, and so on. So it's based on a very, very low base. And then from there, they will calculate your calorie requirements and how much money or income that you need in order to afford that kind of calorie requirements, which is really, really low. In fact, I think Malaysia, because they have to report to the MDG, when they calculate the poverty line, actually they have adjusted the threshold slightly above. So we actually have what we call the MDG plus indicators, Millennium Development Goals. That's before the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals. So in fact, even after adjusting for a higher threshold, our poverty rate is still very, very low. So in fact, there are some discussions, at least amongst, I have a colleague here who's actually doing a lot of work on this, Greg, to think about what are the items that actually could go into this basket now that can sort of reflect the aspirations of Malaysian society, and whether we need to move away from the kind of basic needs type of approach to something that is more aspirational in nature. And of course, the government's answer to this is the B40. That means I have a new group now, which I don't call them poor, but I call them B40, and there's still programs that are targeted at them. But whether that should be the approach or not, I mean, I'm not sure. So I hope that gives you a glimpse of how this is calculated in this case. Second question is about unpaid care work and the kind of initiatives that the government has. Now, I think that there is definitely a range of initiatives, things like trying to encourage private sector to set up childcare centers, making it mandatory for government centers to have childcare centers, giving tax incentives, deductions to companies, and so on. Promotion efforts, flexible working hours, maternity leave has been moved up now from 60 days to 90 days. But when we look at the number, I mean, we did a quick estimation of the number of children or families actually send their children to register childcare is actually very, very small. That means for all the time, I mean, I think this trace back to the 7 Malaysia plan. That means for so many Malaysia plans, we've been putting these kind of incentives and programs in place. It has not actually expanded our registered childcare by a significant amount. And largely, I think families still rely on extended family to help. That means you get your mother or grandparents to help, or you get nannies or babysitters. That means the unregistered childcare centers. So how do you then deal with this question? I think under the new government, Pakatan Harapan has announced the EPF 2% that you can. EPF for housewives, you can give, and that's another example of a program. Now, I just want to sort of comment on this program to give an illustration of my thinking on this issue. And I want to say that at the onset, the EPF 2% given to housewives is definitely a recognition that is long overdue to give to unpaid domestic work and care, which is great. But the thing is, it is still EPF 2% targeted at housewives, meaning to say that you are will it be reinforcing again gender roles? That means, are you saying that I mean, for housewife, you stay at home, then you get the incentive, but if you go to work, you don't get the incentive. So a simple tweak to the program, for example, just calling it EPF 2% for homemakers or care workers, that will give a more gender balanced kind of design to the program, so that you encourage fathers to also stay home to do domestic and unpaid care work. I mean, the kind of thinking needs to come. Things like paternity leave. Malaysia is still at 0 at this point. Mandatory maternity leave is about 90 days, but paternity leave is 0. Compared to even countries like Cambodia and Philippines, where I think it's easily like 2 days, 10 days. UK is like it's longer. And of course, in UNDP we get like a month for maternity leave. I mean, not we anymore, but I'm not in UNDP. Yeah, so I think some of these simple tweaks to the program to have a gender lens to look at some of these, where fine, I mean, recognizing unpaid care work, children's welfare is good, but how do you do it in a way where you do not reinforce gender roles and to make sure that it supports also the agenda about female labor force participation?
Just going to say, and women in leadership positions, because apparently more women in leadership positions, like women in decision-making positions, is correlated directly to paternity leave. So the more fathers take on care work, the more women free up time to focus on their careers. And so there's a direct link between all those things. Sorry, I'm not a panelist. June, you wanted to say something.
Actually, Suri, you touched it as well. It's okay. It means that we're all in the same wavelength. So, just touching on the maternity leave, yes, it's a good initiative to increase it from 60 to 90 days. But as Chris and Surya said, that it doesn't exactly address the societal norms, the cultural norms, that childcare is not just, the burden is not just a woman. So if I were to share, like in Norway, they've actually given incentive. I don't really like the name, but it's called daddy leave. They could have rephrased it differently. But it is essentially a policy that encourages fathers to take longer paternity leaves. And at the same time, if a mother also takes maternity leave, both of them are actually compensated for the time that they are taking off to take care of the child. So it's sort of important to see like how these sort of like influences would help the policy, which then trickles down to how it will actually address gender empowerment.
Yeah, just add on to what June was saying. There's also a parental leave where it's shared between the father and mother. And in certain countries, if the father doesn't take the parental leave, the companies and the bosses might have, they might look differently on you. Yeah, I think there's also this cultural norms, which is very important, yeah, in setting gender roles.
Okay, yeah.
Can I get on the, I mean, I agree with all that. I just want to jump on the third question. The third question.
The third question on the coordination of B40 initiatives, yeah?
Yeah, but also just the scale of it as well. I think I probably, first of all, would disagree with some assumptions made. I don't think there's a lot of NGOs or social entrepreneurs involved in this space. Given the scale of the problem, the number of people involved and number of organizations involved is way too small. Number one. Number two is that those that are involved, is there a good measure of success? Never mind on the macro level, but on the micro level, whether success is very clear, which then comes to the quality of talent that delivers the results, as well as the funding mechanisms that was brought up earlier on. So the question is always like, yeah, I want you to solve societal problems, but I want you to make a profit at the same time. I get a bit worked up by that. But, right, okay, so we're also on the same page on that point. Because that works for a certain type of challenges, but not for all. So it cannot be a blanket statement. And unfortunately, a lot of funders right now see that as a sexy space to be in and be funding in that point of view. So I think, just to recap, I think we're severely short on scale. Again, why is that the case? Where would most of you want to work when you guys leave here? I assume your mom, especially after being paid for the tailor's college salary, or parents who pay for the tailor's college salary, wants you to work in the corporate sector in order to justify the return on investment on your education. Right? Can they then quantify the impact from a societal perspective? We're just not there yet. So again, I'm going to make a pitch that you guys are here, you guys are young, consider joining Teach Malaysia for 2 years to accelerate your impact. Because a lot of our alumni then go off into various other spaces in environmental, urban planning as well. Actually, there's a group involved with that, just to put it out there.
Thank you. Chris, I mean, just to link that question to what Zamir was saying, but also, again, to bring it back to the institute, to the policy level, I remember that was one of the things, when we were working on the B40 project, that was one of the things that we were thinking about. How do you kind of coordinate or get a grasp or get a sense of how many people, how many groups are really working on B40 issues? Because depending on where you work, sometimes it seems like there's not that many people. And sometimes when you move into different areas, it seems like there's a lot of people working on this issue. Chris, do you want to comment on that? Because that was something we were talking to ICU about at some point, no?
Yeah, so my thought on this issue about coordination is changing as, you know, as the more I interact and work with different parties. And my fear is that, I mean, this coordination issue has been brought up quite a lot. Also, the problem is that lack of coordination. They're all working in silo and so on. And every time this problem comes up, the issue is let's set up a committee to coordinate. So because there's so many coordination issues, that we have so many committees set up to coordinate, and then all the people who are supposed to be actually doing the thinking and talking to each other, they're just attending meetings to coordinate. And you have reports to review and so on, and that's taking up time. So it's actually not solving the coordination problem. And the more I think about it, I feel that this could, in fact, be a cultural issue. I mean, coordination is not working in silo, it's just about us having to learn to talk to each other. So if you're from this department, I'm from this ministry, pick up the phone, call, have an informal chat. Do we even have that kind of culture in our bureaucracy? And I think that's something that has to be instilled. It's softer than having to set up a formal mechanism to coordinate. And in those meetings, if people they're still not willing to share. And the kind of cultural practice or value system is that I still want to protect my territory and all that. That's not going to solve the problem. So I think there's definitely a lot of people working in different departments, agencies working on B40. But solving the coordination issue, I think, requires that kind of softer approach about creating a culture of openness, sharing, and so on.
Jude, I think on that point that Chris mentioned about being able to work as a team, right? I think that's also something missing in our education. What's the social, emotional aspect of education that is missing?
I agree. June, you wanted to comment?
It's just like a small comment, basically. I think, Zanwe, you touched upon social entrepreneurship as well. And often we find the difficulties, like there are a lot of NGOs working on the ground as well. But then there's also the question of how they can transfer that into something which is sustainable for themselves as well. A lot of, yes, no doubt that they work directly with the community that they're with. But then again, how then you bring in the business model which is sustainable for them to sustain themselves and to continue helping with the bottom 40 as well. And on another note, having worked with DPU, one of the things that kept coming up is that they do want to have a lot more of NGO civil society participation in addressing the bottom 40. But the problem is, even when the NGOs, when there's a discussion, sometimes then the civil society, due to lack of strengthening, which we've mentioned as well, there was not a proposal, there was not an idea that could be translated, that could be carried forward at the policy level. So there's that gap missing there. So sometimes you ask manager, so what do you want to do? Oh, you want to do this, how do you want to do that? We're not quite sure. And then we talk to EPU. Then how do you want to tackle on the ground? Oh, we'll work on it, but we don't even know how to approach them. So there's that. As Chris pointed out, if we can work together effectively, and then that lack gap can be small, make less wider, then we can work effectively together.
I just want to add on the coordination part. So in terms of social protection, like back in 2014, I did a study on that. And it's 18 different agencies giving out different kinds of welfare and then using the different database of the poor. So this kind of level of coordination is a problem. And there are examples like from Brazil, La Bolsa Familia, which is a combination of different welfare and cash transfer program. And one of the success factor is that they put it under a same umbrella after that, instead of doing different programs and different people doing different things. So that eradicated quite a significant number of poverty in that sense. I think that's something we can look at, rather than setting up a committee to coordinate, but to come together and look at this kind of policies in a more comprehensive and holistic way, and how different policies affect each other. Yeah, I think that would be a better way forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Yashin. Questions? I'm going for a second round of questions. Unless panelists wanted to add comments? No? Questions? I have one question up there. Feel free to put up your hands first so I can direct the mic to you. I have another question there after that, yeah? Please give us your name and question.
Hi, my name is Tanisha. So my question is, all of you talk about the paternalistic nature of policy implementation in Malaysia. I just want to know how much of it do you think boils down to this Asian sort of culture of us thinking that we always need to tell people what, we feel like we need to tell people what is best for them. And because of this, how long do you think that it'll take before this culture sort of eradicates? So is this paternalistic policy implementation approach due to our cultural norms? That's my question.
Good question. Can I get the next question, please? Can you pass the mic out?
Just pass it down.
Did you have a specific person that you wanted to ask this question to, or was it just open to the entire panel? Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Jun. My question is that what is the difference in poverty in East Malaysia and the Peninsular Malaysia? Is it because of the education, the infrastructure, or is it that the racial or religion problems that exist? So how do we combat all these problems?
That's okay. Like Zami said, there's a whole panel on that. But okay. Yashin, would you be comfortable taking that second question? Or any of the... Sorry, is there a third question? Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, okay. Mic goes back there.
Hi, my name is Kenny, and my question is regarding education. I'm just wondering if you think that inequality in Malaysia is too great to have a national standard test like the PSR. Because if you think about it, kids, like if a kid coming from a T40 background has the opportunity and the parents can afford to send these kids to kindergarten. But kids from B40, the parents are like working and they'll probably not be able to afford to send their kids to kindergarten. So when they enter standard 1, some kids will be able to read, write, but certain kids will not. So when it comes to like standardized tests, these B40 kids unfortunately underperform, and could this be the reason why they drop out, because they feel demotivated?
Yeah, I think the question is basically, what's the purpose of standardized tests, and is it does it further enhance inequality and inequity? Right? Yeah. Yes, I think. And but I think also probably just building on that point of culture, at the same time, and I'll combine both. Currently, we do have a culture where a test measures the worth or intelligence of a person, and that's the culture that we have. And I disagree with having that culture, but I agree with keeping some form of standardized tests to understand where we are at every point. So using it from a development point of view as a means, not as an end evaluation point of view. Is that clear? One point of view. So then, therefore, there needs to be a whole cultural shift around what is the meaning of assessments, what is the meaning of examinations, and how we interpret that out of it. On top of that, I also think our view of our type of examination needs to change as well. I think a perfect example of this is for the longest time, kids would get A's in for English in UPSR, PMR/PT3 or SPM, and then fail an interview because they couldn't communicate. The written syllabus actually has components of speaking and listening in English, but the assessments that were designed did not have any component of that. So that's the tested syllabus. And then you got the taught syllabus, which should, in theory, follow the written curriculum or syllabus, but it follows the assessments. So actually, if we change the assessment slightly and we explore different ways of assessing, we would then promote some of that a bit more. And because this was my first time at the debating competition, I think there was also a factor that was called mannerism or manner when you debate. Is it more aggressive? Is it more collegial? And those are things that you can introduce into the education system and assessment points to create a more holistic education that covers multiple types of intelligences. And some kids will, I think there's a perfect picture that shows a few animals, a giraffe, a monkey, a fish, an elephant. And then the test is whoever climbs up the tree is the smartest. But we don't recognize the diversity of every child and the potential of every person.
Yashin and maybe June, you might have some comments too on paternalistic policies being a result of the Asian mindset.
Yeah, I do think there's, to a certain extent, there's correlation between the Asian mindset and paternalistic policies as well. So I think Merdeka Center has done a telephone poll kind of thing, and a high percentage actually still think that the government should implement wholesale policies and interventions rather than more on the community or how can the society comes in. So on the other hand, I think there's also how, like what Zamir has said, the education as well, how it is in the classroom, how the children, the next generation are educated. So we always have this memorization and imparting knowledge rather than, there's no interaction and no like creative work in terms of problem solving. So in the classroom, children are taught to be, you take instruction, you follow what the teacher says. So if during the examination, you don't have a particular keyword and you're wrong. So these are the things that we are brought up with, and we believe that, yeah, we should wait for instructions, and we can only be right in certain ways. We don't think out of the box, we don't see there's other perspectives, other alternatives, other ways of doing things. So I think that also contributes and it creates a vicious cycle. So I think to reverse that is come back to the education. Creativity, I think, is very important in education. Like what was mentioned during the debate just now on technology taking over, robots taking over. So what is the role for humans then? I think is when people have to be creative, you have to be to come up with new ideas. That's your role. That's the job of the future, rather than doing routine work. The computer can definitely do much better than all of us. So that is what our education should strive towards. The shift of moving from exam-based, rote learning, all this instruction and knowledge to more creative, and how I think this is also part of how you bring us into the system, promote creativity, yeah, to look at different aspects. Yeah.
So just to add on to what Yashin has said, I agree that there are a lot of our Asian culture's influences when it comes to decisions of policy making as well. But I would come from a different perspective and say that sometimes when we view policies, but especially pertaining to B40, we tend to have more of a charity-based lens that we put on, versus what was discussed, that we need to look at more of a developmental model when we are looking into addressing and into coming up with policies when we are looking at the B40.
Sami, did you want to comment on this particular question?
Just a very quick one on the Asian culture. Definitely there's the paternalistic approach, but there's a lot of wisdom in the Asian culture, I feel, from a collective point of view. If you think about the fundamental units of communities and change, gotong royong culture is very strong, and I think we should also celebrate that side of the Asian culture.
Okay, Chris, did you want to take that enormous question on the differences in poverty between East and West Malaysia, and that over to you?
The short answer is I don't know. Well, I think if you look at the poverty line measure, I think memang you're talking about Sabah Sarawak being the poorest in terms of ranking. But if you look at the bottom 40% definition, I think the ranking is slightly different. I mean, I can't remember. I don't tend to say it like that. I'm pretty sure that that's how the ranking looks. So I think that Perak, Selangor could be like ranking high on the list as well. So I mean, I think the larger point that you're trying to ask is that the kind of development outcomes that we see, why is there this disparity between Sabah Sarawak and Peninsular Malaysia? And I think the dynamics there are really quite different. So even if we talk about indigenous people issues, for example, Orang Asli is about 0.6% of our total population. So they're minority of the minority in Peninsular Malaysia. But once you talk about Orang Asal issues in Sabah Sarawak, they may not actually be the minority population. So then again, the social political configuration in those states are actually quite different. And I think particularly in Sabah Sarawak, the whole question that's a bit close to my heart as well is about the rural question. Do we actually have an answer to the rural question? That means if we talk about I think a big bulk of Sabah Sarawak is about maybe oil and gas, oil palm, logging, and so on. And if you were to sort of want to find an alternative to these kind of mono cash crops and logging, what could potentially be the answer to this? As I said, I don't know. I think talking to friends, we are exploring things like alternative tourism, things like agroforestry, that means doing agriculture in a way that is still in line with environmental principles. Again, these are ideas not tested. We don't have evidence to show, but I think we need to think along those lines in terms of what is the rural question for Sabah Sarawak, and questions of infrastructure as well. And of course, Peninsular Malaysia, completely different dynamics, because I think the urban agglomeration is a lot bigger with KL conurbation. I mean, Kuala Lumpur conurbation actually is the largest, and we have been looking at share of labor from 1982 to 2017. In fact, the share of labor for all the states have been decreasing, except for Sabah and for Kuala Lumpur and Selangor. That means I have some questions about the Sabah data, but I think the fact is that there's one particular conurbation in Malaysia that's basically sucking resources from the rest of Malaysia, and the impact of that on development. So, and it's not just rural urban, but it's also issues of urban, mid-sized towns, small towns, and all that.
Yeah, I just add on to Chris. I think the poverty rate for Sabah is 2.9 for Sabah, when our average poverty rate is only 0.4. And then the rural Sabah is at 5.3%. Yeah. There's also one factor that Sabah is also one of the richest resources, like the state, and they have the highest poverty as well. So yeah, that's the slight moral injustice there in that sense.
Sorry, this is
okay.
Sorry, it's okay. I got it. I think when we talk about Sabah particularly, as pointed out by Chris, like even the demographics, the population is complicated as it is, and as within the part of, there's undocumented people as well, the statelessness people as well, and you have the mixture, but then you also have the Baja load as well, which is still it's a mystery to us, because they are rich resources, but yet they are like the highest in terms of the poverty rate within the states in Malaysia. And then if you go to East Sabah, there's a little bit of conflict going on there that kind of seeps into the labour force, that kind of seeps into making the communities who are already vulnerable much more vulnerable. So we don't have the answers yet, but hopefully in the future we can uncover that more.
Questions? More questions. I'm going to do my last round of questions. Oh, suddenly all the hands come up. Okay, I'm going to do my last round of questions. We will take 1, 2, 3, 4. I will take those 4 questions. This is the last round, and then I'm going to wrap this up. Mike, please. Please state your name, preferably where you're from if you want to, and then question, and if you have a particular panelist or if it's just open.
Hi, my name is Visva. This question is open to the whole panel. Forum was great. You've stated a lot of issues as well as solutions. So the question is, are these solutions being applied at scale? If not, what is blocking you from doing it? Can I ask a second one really quick? This game that is Zamir from TFM. I was going to ask you, your works are more into education. So, assuming you were the education minister, right, what's the top 3 things you would do to improve the scene in education in Malaysia? Thank you.
Great. Now let's take the round of questions.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Bilgzal from MIDP. So my question is, it's a policy question with respect, a narrow question than the UBI question that we had in the public exhibition debate just now. So the Malaysian public discourse surrounding cash handouts as a form of welfare has always been approached, I think in Malaysian public discourse at least, from a political lens, aspersions of corruption, aspersions of buying votes and things like that. But much of that public discourse is now focused on the merits or demerits of the flexibility of finances that it gives the poor, or whether or not what kind of spending patterns that the poor has when they're given this cash. So I'm just wondering, and this question is open to everybody, from your personal findings in your own institutions, what are the spending patterns of the B40 or the hardcore poor with respect to this policy? And what is the way up between cash systems versus governments acting as an intermediary providing goods and services? It's a narrow conception of the UBI question, so we don't need to ask the universality versus narrow conception of the question. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Although Chris had an opinion on that too. Yeah. I remember we had this debate back in the office when we used to work together. Last question, two more questions. Lady in red over there, and cameraman.
So I have a question mostly on awareness, because I feel like a lot of our measurements on how bad a situation is, or what are the effectiveness of a particular policy, is largely dependent on the surroundings that we are in. So, for example, like a lot of us here today know about this event either through a particular circle, and our accessibility towards this event is also largely dependent on where you're from. So we have a larger understanding of the issue. But for those who are a little bit who are inaccessible, or they would not really, their perception of the problem is largely dependent on what the situation around their community is. So, and we have also seen how there was the mismatch between government incentives and the awareness of it within the community. So how would you sort of increase awareness both on the issue as well as the policies that are done in order to solve it?
And the fourth question.
Hi, my name is Vishal, and my question is directed to June. So this entire discussion today has been focused a lot on absolute poverty. So the question here is, what does the UNDP do about relative poverty? Is that a concern that's taken into consideration? Is anything being done about that? Or is that an issue that's not as urgent as dealing with absolute poverty?
Okay, so questions on solutions and scale. Sami, did you want to talk to that along with the top three things as MOE Minister, as Minister of Education?
Sure. And also probably just want to touch on the awareness question as well. So scale, I think because we're dealing with a lot more of a people issue, things can't scale as fast as they would if it was just purely a technology issue. So there's always a graph that shows like, oh, how fast did Twitter get to 50 million, how fast did TV get to 50 million, TVs get to 50 million users or something. And it always goes much, much shorter from decades into months. But when it comes to social challenges, that same speed, I don't think it can be expected because there needs to be a lot more effort to address the challenges. And therefore, like the points I brought up earlier on, it's what is the culture around dealing with that, what's the value that society places on that versus selling a bank loan or selling insurance in that sense. So that's a very quick response to scale. On the question of Minister of Education, I really appreciate the question. But personally for me, I would never want to be a Minister of Education because I still have a very uncertain view of politics to begin with. I'm more of a civil service kind of guy. I'd rather be the Director General. I think politics, you end up KSU Director General, and you end up, as a politician, you end up more playing to what the masses want. Fundamentally also, I then think politics and elections might need to change because it actually isn't very well functioning. But that wasn't your question, but I'm going to say I've been looking into sortitions. What if we get rid of all elected government officials and we fill parliament with a random sampling of the population? And it's called sortitions. I hope you guys will check it out. Huh? Disruption, yeah. So anyway, that's something really cool. Check it out later. But coming back to your question, what would I want to focus on if I was Director General, right? Number one, I would want to slightly shift the purpose of education. So right now, education is a very economic focus. I want to shift it towards solving some of our biggest problems and solving some of our biggest problems. So they need to be problem solvers, or they're creating value that's beyond an economic purpose, which then ties into SDGs, social value, environmental. You can park it all there, but that's purpose. Number two, I want to change the culture. Right now, the culture is a culture of fear. I think someone else mentioned that. I want it, and that fear comes from because we lack the tools to understand what's going on within us. I am currently really exploring social and emotional learning. We're going, as an organization, we're going through this new type of leadership called conscious leadership, which is an intersection of emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and the traditional views of leadership, to really explore what is going on inside of us that causes us to interpret what's happening outside. And there's always a loop that happens. And it also has elements of psychology where it explores the traumatic experiences we have gone through in a regular childhood. Right? All of us experience trauma, and we all process it in very different ways. Of course, the B40 communities experience a lot more trauma than those that come from more privilege, but everybody experiences trauma, and how that then wires our brains to interpret the world. So culture, leadership. The third point that I want to focus on is more structure, and I think I just mentioned that. I want to radically decentralize the system, but again, once I'm put into that part, if I was in that position, I don't know if I'll be able to do it. On that, because it's a big move, but maybe start off with small pilots and improve that success. So there is a way to scale that. The awareness piece, I think I want to just jump on the earlier question on Sabah and Sarawak. Very, very. I think the question is actually, we're not, even if we're coming here, how many of us would actually spend even 3 hours going and visiting a community that we're not familiar with? So again, I'll just pitch Teach for Malaysia. Spend 2 years.
Okay. Cash and merits, demerits, spending patterns.
Okay, I think it's not easy to disentangle the political side of this, and perhaps to some extent it is necessary to politicize some of this discussion. And I don't think you need to think about politicization as something that's necessarily bad. It allows for public discourse, debates, and all that. So I think we need to look at like things like Brim, Now Batuan, Sarah Hidup in a more objective way. And of course, BRIM has been basically targeted at the cost of living issues for the bottom 40%. And personally, I still struggle a lot with this idea about pegging a particular cash transfer to that idea of cost of living, because I think cost of living issues is something that has to be managed at the macro prudential level. So things like growth, inflation, and how that translates into labor market issues, jobs. I'm not sure whether a cash transfer program at the kind of scale can actually address the kind of issue. But if it's welfare oriented, yes, maybe. And also just to mention, I think for BRIM in particular, the amount has actually increased from I think 2 billion back in 2012 to about 6.3 billion in 2016. But this is on the back of subsidy rationalization. That means when the BRIM was given at such a large amount, but the pullback of the subsidy is actually larger. That means the reduction in subsidies and social transfers has actually decreased from I think 40 over billion to 20 over billion. That means an increase of 4 billion in BRIM cash transfers, but a reduction in social transfers of about 20 over billion. So I think that's why people can still feel that pinch, although transfers are still being given out. Now, the question about expenditure patterns of the bottom 40, in fact, is something that we are looking at. My colleague Greg, he's the man to talk to. Because B40 is basically an income classification, but we also want to look at it from the expenditure side. And very interesting findings so far, but don't cite me or quote me because this research is ongoing, so it's not finalized yet. But we are looking at potential inclusion errors in the B40, and there's people who could potentially not be from the poor, but they're actually in the B40 by looking at the expenditure patterns. So we're looking at things like spending on things like wine, things like sauna and spa and painting. Not to say that the poor can't spend on these kind of things, but it's just not typical of an average B40. And we're seeing some evidences of that. And once you adjust for things like cost of living, whatnot, there could potentially also be the poor that is in the M40 category. So exclusion errors and inclusion errors. In fact, I think we have to look at, we're trying to see whether we can demarcate the Malaysian households, whether B40, M40, T20 makes sense or not. Because by expenditure patterns alone, potentially we could be looking at B70, B80, the M29 and T1%. So it's not necessarily 40, 40, 20. So I mean, there must be a coherent way of how we demarcate these things. It cannot be just a crude kind of income cutoff. So yeah, I'll just end it.
Great. Okay. On June, you have a question on UNDP and relative poverty versus absolute poverty.
Okay, so my short answer would be yes. We are looking into relative poverty now, and I know that again, don't cite me on this because I know that my counterparts in UNICEF are doing research, which we are part of it as well. That we are looking at urban poverty, but from a relative poverty perspective, but also taking into account the multidimensional poverty areas that was mentioned by Chris earlier. And this was the difference between absolute and relative poverty is also that something that we have been discussing with our economic counterpart, EPU. And that is also something that we hope to be reflected in the remaining 11th Malaysian plan going to 2020. So.
Okay, I just touched a little bit more on the cash handout side. So apart from the politics of it, I think from a policy point of view, cash transfer is a short-term measure, basically. So there are studies done in Latin America because they have done this cash transfer quite extensively. Yeah, so cash handout transfers can only, it does reduce poverty, but there's very minimal impact, basically. It has its limitations, so it can only do that much. Because of the small amount, like how much do they have? It's like a year, they get 900, roughly around that figure for a year. So how much can it help the poor, basically? So the effect is very minimal. So it's a short-term measure. So what we really want to look at is more long-term measures in terms of education, in terms of wage, cost of living. So it's the cost of living high, then do we get a fair wage in the labor market? I think that those are more pertinent questions that should we give this amount of, of course it is for emergencies and in life crisis, cash transfer is important, but it's very short term, yeah. So we should look at a more long-term strategy.
I mean, just building up on that, an example is like the fuel subsidy that that's currently ongoing. Like, is it a good measure for long term. Short term probably yes, but long term we have to look at a different angle or different options of maybe having less dependency on using fuel. That means that do we build up more our public transportation? Do we explore more renewable energies to make it cheaper? So those are the things that we need to think long term versus just giving out subsidies or cash outs.
Chris, you had a short comment on relative and absolute poverty.
On the question of relative poverty, right? Definitely, I think that's just important because relative poverty is a measure of. You basically peg the poverty rate to the median income of society. That's fine, but the downside of relative poverty is that when society as a whole becomes worse off, that means you can actually have improvement in your distribution rate. That means if the median drops, but just at the lower rung of society actually drop less than the median, actually inequality will improve. So you will have that kind of downside in terms of the measurement. I think what it raises is the fact that when we talk about absolute versus relative, is the whole question about the relationship between poverty and inequality. And I think that's we require another panel to talk about these kind of things now. Because some people will argue that it is okay to have inequality as long as poverty is reduced. The kind of growth process that we have, as long as it helps to sort of reduce income gap, but the bottom 10 or 20% is above that minimum threshold, that's fine. So what should be that normative gap that is acceptable by society for inequality, and how that sort of interrelates with the poverty question? Then relative poverty, all these is measurements to some of these things.
Okay, so we're almost out of, in fact, we're out of time. And we have taken you, through this panel discussion, we have taken you through definitions and causes and solution, all the time mainstreaming gender into the conversation, which I'm quite proud of. And in fact, I think we've complicated the question of poverty for you, and hopefully have you leaving with more questions and interest in reading up on the subject matter. Of course, panelists will be around, but before we say goodbye, I am going to pass the mic one more time around to all panelists to say their goodbyes. I'll start with June, so Zami, you can have your quick shot at the end.
Okay, so I think just to wrap it up, I hope this session will also give you like a thorough understanding, if not thorough understanding, like further probing questions on understanding border body. To be honest, this question for us, we would say that do we truly understand it? Probably not. We need more understanding. We need more comprehensive data to understand this. So I won't make a pitch for UNDP. But you're welcome to have a conversation with us because you volunteer with us. Yes, I'll pass it on.
Yeah, I think for poverty as a whole, is not, of course, the government has a big role to play in this, but there's also every individual and private sector and civil society comes into play. So everyone does have a role, in big and small matter as well. So I can pitch for ideas. Ideas have Autistic Center and also Ideas Academy. So we do work with underprivileged children as well. So we do appreciate support in terms of monetary or in terms of effort. Yeah.
Just two closing remarks. First, when you talk about poverty, B40 and all that, number one, gender matters. Sorry, I will strongly agree with me. Yeah. And I think having a gender lens to look at some of these really, I think, will tease out the issues a lot more in terms of how we come up with solutions and so on. And my last point is actually, I call for a review of the National Statistics Act, the Akta Statistik Negara, because for us to do some of this research on understanding the B40, how to demarcate the B40 households, expenditure patterns, measurements, and all that, we need more data. And I think one, we need to review and perhaps overhaul the Statistics Act to make data more available for researchers, for students at an affordable, accessible way. Or perhaps to introduce freedom of information at the federal level, because this is tested in Selangor and Penang. And now with the new government, should we be thinking about FOI at the federal level? And I think this is the basis for a robust policy discourse in the country. Thank you.
I'm just going to repeat what I've been saying the whole time. I think change and transformation is a long journey. It's difficult. But my bet, and I invite you guys to consider this bet, that it takes talent, culture, and leadership to drive that overall, so especially for a future we can't predict. Right? And I also invite you to experience B40 in all its ways. Yes, teach Malaysia for 2 years. You might be placed in Niri, you might be placed in Sampurna, or anywhere else. But this 2-year experience, as soon as you graduate, is such a formative experience in your whole career. And actually, the 2-year leadership development program in education has been replicated in mental health, prison, the police force, and the social sector in the UK. So there's actually this 2-year leadership development program in these different sectors to get more talent into the space. And I find any of you who's a bit crazier to consider starting up something similar in the field that you care passionately about.
Great, and with that, I want to thank a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, MIDP, for organizing the event and for having us here. Have a good one, you all, and enjoy the rest of the panels. They won't be as awesome.
Thank you, Suri. Thank you, Zamir, Yashin, June, and Chris. All that. I don't think the conversation is over. If you think about it, I'll just feed you off the audience once you walk down the stage. You'll realize a lot of people will just crowd around you. So good luck with that. Before you all leave.